Welcome everybody. Of course, to you who are, who are here today in the auditorium Avenue Hoche, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here, but also for the people present in live on the webinar. My name is Christophe Liénard. I am Head of Innovation for Bouygues, and we are delighted to welcome you this morning for this MIT Symposium in Paris. In fact, it is the third MIT event we are organizing here. So it has been almost a tradition, Carl, to host this event. And it's also a real pleasure to meet again in real life and to return to good habits. I hope you will enjoy the thematics and speakers we have chosen today. And I pass the floor immediately to Carl. Carl is head of the MIT ILP Industrial Liaison Program in Boston. Carl.
Well, thank you very much, Christophe and Group Bouygues, for again hosting us here. This is our first live event in Europe. Well, really overseas, that we've had in 2 years. We just started back on campus with having live events, and we're seeing the attendance begin to grow. And we look forward to welcoming any and all of you to our events coming up in November, December, and into the spring. But it's been an incredible 2 years, and again, Christophe and Group Bouygues for being first in line, as always, in innovation and helping us to be here today. So I thought what I would do to the audience and welcome, and also the many people who are live streaming with us this morning, is go a little bit over MIT for those of you who are not as familiar with it as I am. So first we'll do a bit of a flyover of the MIT campus, and I think you'll see that it's become what we call a highly densified environment, often called perhaps the most innovative square mile in the world. Certainly in certain technologies it is. But we have a culture of interchange 24 hours a day between industry, academia, government, non-governmental groups, and the like. And you can see that there are many, many new buildings here. I'll show you in a minute a set of what this area looked like when I went to school some time ago in the early 80s. You can see the Kendall Square area was essentially a large parking lot with various old industrial locations available. And now it's a huge area of, as I say, construction, which is ongoing as we speak, and we have plans to increase the capacity of many millions of square feet going forward. So this here just goes to show you MIT runs east to west along the Charles River, and we've had an influx of major corporations. I'm just highlighting some of the major IT and life sciences companies that have located full-time research laboratories, some many hundreds of people, right next to the MIT campus. And you can see the MIT campus along, again, the Charles River Media Lab, the Sloan School of Management, biological engineering, chemical engineering, and MIT Nano. And our offices in the Industrial Liaison Program sit right in the middle. We have lovely office space. We can host companies as we've hosted Bouygues in the past, and we look forward to hosting you and your companies next time you visit with us in the United States. MIT is regarded as one of the elite universities in the world, and I would say rightly so, not surprisingly. About 1,000 faculty, about 1,000 lecturers, now actually 96 Nobel Prizes to graduates or faculty from MIT, about 1,800 research staff and 11,000 students. The majority of the students are graduate students, and we have many thousands of postdoctoral students as well, which represent a great recruiting opportunity for many companies around the world, as many of those postdocs are not going to find the kind of academic careers that they may have hoped to have found. Large interdisciplinary research laboratory infrastructure. We have over $760 million in research expenditures each year About a quarter of that comes from industry, making MIT the largest recipient of corporate research funding in the world, and a very vibrant patenting and licensing activity, which of course helps define why corporations are interested in leveraging MIT. I'd like to take you now through some of the major interdisciplinary initiatives that MIT has underway. First, the MIT Energy Initiative. This is an initiative we started about 8 years ago. We've raised and spent over $860 million in various activities related to renewables, carbon capture and sequestration, advanced materials, storage, and the like. Digital world, we'll touch on that a little bit today, but this is, of course, impacting and disrupting companies, technologies around the world. Sustainability, of course, Europe is in advance of the United States in that capacity, but we're seeing a groundswell, I hope, of interest, and MIT is doing a lot of fundamental research in the area of sustainable practices as well. About 5 years ago, we launched our first college in 40 years, the Schwarzman College, which is essentially looking at artificial intelligence and the ability of us to reverse engineer human intelligence into hardware and solutions for humankind. The Innovation Initiative is an effort to accelerate the time between invention and commercialization through programs of prototype subsidies and the like. Future of Work was a task force that MIT put together, looking at what is the new normal for work and to what degree does robotics and so forth impact employment. What are the new opportunities there? And that's had a big impact in Congress in the United States to think through some of the policies our politicians are discussing. And then finally, the MIT Nano. We about 2 years ago now, I think, we built what's the most advanced nanostructure facility in the country, over 300,000 square feet of clean space, prototyping space, all dedicated to building the nanostructures of the future for prototype and other development. The Industrial Liaison Program, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a gateway to MIT. We develop individual customized programs for our members like Bouygues and others through the use of program directors like Eduardo, who will be up here in a minute. Some of the offerings we have that have proved to be very popular are executive briefings, where we bring together company executives at the senior level to talk about leading trends in technology and management, some of which you'll hear today. I will say one of the things that we found, well, before I get to that, historically, we did a lot of individual faculty meetings in addition to these group meetings. We hold a very robust and coming back to a series of conferences and events, both on campus and globally. We'll have in the spring another event in London, in Tokyo. Hopefully, I'm not anxious to sit in quarantine for 3 days in a hotel in Tokyo at their selection, but hopefully that'll be fixed by the time that goes on. And it's all organized around a program director. As you've all experienced during the pandemic, we've had to pivot to remote delivery of content, and we've done that through individual faculty meetings, through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and the like. Conferences and events, we've had a number. And what's interesting here is we found that we've received great receptivity from companies for single member-only webinars. And so some of these we've been able to broadcast faculty that reach 200, up to over 1,000 people in individual companies to talk about a particular topic. So in some sense, we've had greater impact in delivering MIT content more broadly within companies than we ever had before. We intend to continue that going forward. The program is rebounding since COVID. We're up net 20 companies since the 1st of July, and we're seeing tremendous growth. I think people are very anxious to get back and meet with people and have intellectual stimulation in a way. So we're seeing the fruits of that. So I'm very hopeful that we'll continue to grow going forward. Let me close with a couple of comments on the MIT Startup Exchange. About 6 years ago, we put together a platform of over 1,400 MIT-connected startups that we link expressly with large corporations like Bouygues and others for product development, for prototype and scaling development across a wide range of technologies you'll see on this list. a number of which are trending, from AI, 3D printing, synthetic biology, robotics, cybersecurity. Well, the list goes on, and this is another indication of how interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary MIT research is focused on impact for society. Let me just, second to last slide here. We just did a report with a company called Innovation Leader in Boston looking at, over COVID, how have major companies and startups been finding the linkage between large and small companies. And in fact, what's interesting, 80% of the corporations that we surveyed have increased their startup scouting and engagement efforts during the pandemic. I think this is a reflection of companies looking for more immediate impact than some of the longer-term research concentrations and investments that they've made. But 55% of the corporations still need to develop an internal structure for working with startups. That's not the case with Bouygues, but many companies we've found are still grappling with how do they bring in startup companies, small companies, into their innovation processes. For large corporations, a big problem has been linking these startups with the operating divisions that can actually use this. That's been a challenge. And then I think similarly for the startups themselves, the challenge has been finding the right person in a company that can develop the relationship. This study, 60-page study, is available to our members. There's also a public summarized version, and we can make that available to you. Just come up to me or one of the program directors after the talks, and we'll be happy to do that. And I'll close with this quote. I think it's from Harvard Business Review. A lot of people make fun of our rivalry with Harvard, but I don't feel that way. I feel that, in fact, between Harvard, MIT, and the 60 universities in the Boston area, it just makes for a very, very robust center of knowledge creation and impact for corporations. So here, the quote: "The companies that do best in economic recovery periods are those that master the delicate balance between cutting costs to survive today and investing to grow tomorrow." And I think that's very true. I think that's true for Bouygues. I'm sure that's true for many other companies in the audience. And with that, I'll close and welcome you to the conference. I hope you have a wonderful day. I look forward to meeting you personally at the break, and thank you very much.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, good evening for those of you who are attending remotely. Welcome to the 2021 MIT Group Week Symposium, Adapting Organizations and Cities to Nonlinear Changes. Before we start, some housekeeping rules. Please, no cell phones, keep social distancing, wear masks while you are indoors, and a reminder that you can use Pigeonhole to vote and outvote questions. You may find the QR code that will send you to the link using the agenda or your screens if you are attending remotely. So I would like to start with the first talk with Dr. Steven Spear. He's a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. He will talk about succeeding in periods of non-linear change. Professor Spear, welcome to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just start with some thank yous to my MIT colleagues who invited me to present to you, to our hosts for their hospitality, and for all of you, both here in person and online, for investing your time with us. And I hope we provide a meaningful return on that investment. In terms of my presentation today, let me just explain a little bit the motivations for it. So I've spent the last 20, 25, 30 years trying to understand why certain organizations are so much more successful than their peers, apples to apples, level playing field comparison, why some are so much more successful than others. And this is during normal periods when we think life is more operational, and certainly periods of disruption like we're going through now, where we think of so much having to be about being adaptive, agile, innovative. And so let me just set up a framework to which I'll refer throughout my presentation. When we tend to think about work in general, and we tend to think about innovation in particular, we tend to think about the thing that's on the benchtop in front of us. So in this biotech era, we think about the gene that someone might be manipulating. We might think about computer code that someone is writing or debugging. So that's one level of work, one level of innovation. There's a level above that, which also I think comes naturally when we think about these terms of work and innovation. That level is the instrumentation through which we manipulate the thing in front of us. So in the case of biotech, when we talk about DNA and genes and that sort of thing, we think about CRISPR gene editing technology. And when we think, back in a more physical industrial age, if we think about a machined part, there's the lathe, the drill press, whatever, the instrumentation through which we act on the object. As I'll go through my slides today, when we compare organizations which are doing more or less the same work, the object in front of them, regardless of where they are, and similar objects, the instrumentation they're using, it's similar instrumentation, yet we still get these gigantic differences in performance. And the reason for that, I'll offer, at least in part, is because there's a third layer that too often is overlooked. It's the social overlay, the social circuitry, which determines who's in conversation, who's in collaboration, who's acting creatively with whom, when, about what, in what way. And what I hope to leave you with is a recognition that how we architect and the dynamics we impart onto the social overlay have a huge consequence in terms of the successes that we might enjoy. And so in terms of the motivations for this talk, it's that we are in one of these infrequent periods of significant abrupt change. The good news is that there are ways to think through how we manage ourselves, again, this issue of the social overlay, how we manage ourselves through this period to get to much better outcomes. Where I'd like to start is just point out that these periods of abrupt change do come about periodically, and each time we see some great winners and a whole lot of losers. So my own roots are in studying the auto industry, and it goes back to inspiration during the 1970s, 1980s, where the competitive environment changed significantly. It used to be, coming out of the Second World War, a US-dominated world economy. As we get through the 60s into the 70s into the 80s, becomes multipolar in terms of what's going on. And at the same time, there's also an abrupt change in terms of the prevalence of distributed computing power. So this is sort of the confluence of two changes. One, the operating environment, the competitive environment, the other, the technological environment. And what we saw during the 70s and 80s, that after years of dominance, the American automakers, Chrysler, Ford, General Motors, got wildly disrupted by Toyota, which looked at that new competitive environment and looked at those new technological opportunities and was able to deliver product, much greater speed, lower cost, higher quality, much faster pace of introducing new features, new functions, new technology. And it's wild now, but if you look at the largest auto company in the United States, both in terms of domestic production and domestic sales, it's actually Toyota. I have friends who've left American automakers, and when I ask them, why have you left one of the quote-unquote big three to work at Toyota, they said, because I always wanted a career in North American manufacturing, and Toyota is the place to do that. So this is one example. Second, something we're sort of still going through is as the world economy became more and more multipolar, the rise of China, more economic activity in different parts of Europe, the competitive environment changed, introduction of trade mechanisms, so on and so forth. And we've had this huge non-linear abrupt change in the introduction of digital technologies. And what we've seen is that, again, it's the same playing field, right? Remember, I started off with this idea that we have the benchtop, the object in front of us, the instrumentation through which we act on the benchtop. Well, the object, the instrumentation is available to everybody, and yet we get these tremendously different outcomes in terms of fortune. So what I'd like to talk to you today is how, when we're in these periods of changing competitive environment and these periods of changing technological opportunity, what are some tactics, what are some things we can do to manage that social overlay, that social circuitry of creativity, of collaboration to get to much better outcomes. And what I'd like to suggest is that there are several, we've identified 8 so far, but I'll talk about 3. The first is creating a protected space where people are allowed, while everyone else is doing what they've been doing, and it's absolutely necessary to continue to do what we've been doing, pursue our existing business models, use our existing technology, to allow other people in a protected space to explore not only the new technology, but how the new technology might be used in a new way. So it's this confluence of new technology and new business models. Create that protected space where people can think creatively, unbounded by the regular work of the organization. And I have several examples of where creating that protected space for exploration of how we manage through these periods of abrupt change matter a lot. So the first example I'll give you is going historically, is coming out of the First World War. Aviation had been introduced. I mean, in 1908 was the first time the Wright brothers' achievements had been documented and publicized. The airplane became something of novelty, somewhat of use during the First World War. Coming out of that war, there was this new technology, the airplane. And navies around the world started thinking about how to use this new technology. So that was the technological change. The other part of the confluence was for both the United States and Japan. They both started thinking of themselves as global powers as opposed to regional powers. And so you had this changing competitive environment, changing technological environment. And it turned out that the two countries thought about managing those nonlinear changes in decidedly different ways. So in the Japanese Navy, they started thinking about how one uses naval aviation. And around 1929, the story goes, that the Japanese Admiralty made a decision about how naval aviation would be deployed. So in the military, they talk about doctrine. In the commercial world, we talk about business models. But more or less, it's the same thing. A doctrine or a business model determines how we think about how we think. When faced with a problem, how do we encounter that problem and how do we address it? So the doctrine that emerged in 1929 in Japan was this idea of massive first strike. And the inspiration for that was the success the Japanese Navy had battling the Russians in 1905. Japanese battleships squared off against Russian battleships, dealt a devastating blow to the Russian Pacific Fleet. Their Pacific Fleet decimated, the Russians lost the will to fight, and this sort of became the mental model, the doctrine, the business model for the Japanese Admiralty, which is, now that we have naval aviation, their thought was this is almost like battleships, but with much greater range. And so they started designing their airplanes, their ships, their tactics, their training, et cetera, around this idea of massive first strike. So that was their mental model. On the other side, the U.S. Navy and its Admiralty, again, back to this idea of there's innovation on the benchtop, there's the instrumentation, then there's a social overlay. Well, the benchtop was the same, right, which was airplanes. And the instrumentation was more or less the same, the mechanisms by which we built airplanes and ships, et cetera. But in 1929, or even earlier, the United States Navy's leadership said, airplanes, oceans, it's never been done before. It's premature to settle on a doctrine, to settle on a business model. And so as the United States Navy continued whatever its normal routines were with battleships and frigates and destroyers projecting power across the Atlantic, projecting power into the Pacific during the 1920s and 1930s, what it did also in parallel protected space. It created a mechanism called fleet problems. And I want to emphasize the choice of the word problems versus exercises. Because exercises sounds like rehearsal. Like, we've written something up, and now your job is to go out to sea and execute according to our plan, and the judgment will be of you and how well you adhere to the plan. During the 1920s, 1930s, the U.S. Navy took a very different approach. What they did was they created these problems. And the problems went something like this, which was, Carl, if we're going to do battle in the Pacific, we might have to resupply at sea. How do we do that? And what would Carl say? I've got no idea. So then says, well, let's send sailors and ships out to sea to give that a try. Or someone might say to Eduardo, if we're doing battle in the Pacific, we might need to land troops on shores of small islands. How do we do that? Eduardo rightly would say, it's never been done before in any meaningful fashion. So they created a problem for that. Now, the thing I want to point out with this diagram is you can see the succession of these problems. So remember I said 1929, the Japanese Navy decided on its doctrine, massive first strike. 1929, the United States was on its third problem of defending the Panama Canal. And why is that? Because they tried to figure out how to defend it in 1923, and they concluded they didn't know how to defend the Panama Canal. So they went in 1927 and said, Panama Canal, it's very important for a global navy to know how to defend and attack the Panama Canal. How do we do that? They tried in 1927, and guess what? We don't know how to do it. So they go back in 1929 on their third try to figure this out. And what you can see is as you go down this list from the early 20s to the early 40s, on and on and on, the tackling of problems in this protected space. So whereas the Navy is doing its regular work of patrolling the oceans with the conventional technology of battleships and frigates and whatnot, it's trying to figure out air power in this very dynamic learning way. What's the consequence? When Japan attacked Midway 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese admiral said, "This is fantastic. This is the coup de grace." That'll be my only use of French today, by the way. That'll be the coup de grace, and we'll finish obliterating the United States Navy. It was a devastating loss for the Japanese Navy. And after June of 1942 at the Battle of Midway, while Japan waged a long and bloody war, it was always in retreat. It was always in defense. It was never offensive ever again. And the reason is because when they surprise attacked Midway, they showed up with a doctrine, with a business model, with the use of technology, which was completely inappropriate for actually using naval aviation at sea. And they got the stuffing kicked out of them. Now, this idea of creating protected space to figure things out is a repeated pattern. So another example, well, again, just to be conscientious of time, the Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, is a very famous, not only actual place, but metaphor for giving protected space for people to invent. And the thing I want to offer here, just if you want to spend more time on Skunk Works, is that for each of the inventions that came out of the Skunk Works, it's not just the technology that had to be invented. It was the use of that technology, the business model around that technology. So for example, this third plane down, this very exciting looking SR-71, the spy plane, yes, it was a wild invention, one my uncle actually worked on back when he was a young engineer, but I'll offer that it wasn't just the invention of the technology, it was the use of this technology for the purpose of surveillance when deterrence was just becoming an issue between the nuclear powers. So Skunk Works, we often think of Skunk Works as a place where we send engineers and scientists to do crazy things at the benchtop with the instrumentation. But Skunk Works, at least in Lockheed Martin, is that and the invention of new doctrine, new business models. Third example is in the 1990s, the world auto market started in signaling that it was starting to get very concerned about fuel efficiency, fuel economy. Part of it was just the sheer cost of gasoline. Part of it was the issue of pollution and smog and early indications of concern about global warming. So the same signal went out to all the world automakers. They had access to the same benchtop science and engineering, batteries, internal combustion, this thing and that thing. General Motors and Toyota both tried to invent a solution to this new challenge, which required a new business model. In the case of General Motors, they came out with something called the Chevy Volt. And technically, it's a fairly simple product. It's an electric car, but not a very good electric car. And because the battery technology wasn't so good, it's an electric car. And to recharge the battery periodically, they put a generator, a tiny little engine with a little gas tank on board the car, because otherwise you'd run out of charge after about 30 miles. So that was their solution. And give you a sense of the complexity, it's not just shown here in the diagram, but if you notice that the Chevy Volt had about 10 million lines of software code, I think most of that was the entertainment system. It didn't require a lot of code. Toyota, at the same time, looked at the same challenge. They created a protected space. In the histories, Toyota's internal histories of the development of the Prius, they talk about the Red Room, where they sent these engineers to invent the 21st century car. The reason it was called the Red Room is there's nothing significant about the color red. It just happened. They said, hey, you guys, we want you to stop working on the Corolla, stop working on the Celica, stop working on the Camry, which is not only a legacy technology, but a legacy business model, right? Because Toyota had sort of figured out how to sell mid-size, mid-market, reliable, affordable cars. So no, we want you to invent the car for the 21st century. Go use that conference room. It turned out that conference room had red carpeting, so it became the red room. But out of that, and the allowance to go into a protected space to invent the car for the 21st century, these engineers could depart from the existing business models of what need they're serving, how to provide something to that need. They created partnerships with Mitsubishi Electronics around sophisticated control for power flow. They created partnerships with completely non-automotive companies to get reproducible, high-volume electric motors, which had never been done at nearly the necessary volume. And I want to also point out here is that by being able to step outside the normal channels of development and design and invention, the Prius, when it first came out, compared to the Chevy Volt's 10 million lines of code, 100 million lines of code, 100 million lines of code, because the car with the parallel technology required much more sophisticated power management than the Chevy Volt. Now, what is the result of that? What is the result of that? That when Chevy came to market with the Volt, they managed to sell about 160,000 units over a decade. Now, just to give you a sense, 160,000 units in a single year is an unsuccessful mass market car. Unsuccessful. And this is, so 160,000 units spread over a decade is basically a hobbyist car. Kind of thing that most of us would do in our garage if we were interested, they did in a factory. In comparison, Toyota introduced this hybrid drive, which they had created in this protected space of the Red Room, where people could not only experiment with the technology, but the business models around it, not only what was offered into the marketplace, but partnerships and research, development, design, and so on and so forth. They come out with the Prius, take that technology, tune it onto 36 different platforms, and at last count, they're at about 20 million copies sold. Now, again, I want to just give you a sense of the differences in success, right? So at the Battle of Midway, the Japanese Navy suffered a devastating loss. The United States Navy had a game-changing victory. During the period of the 70s and 80s, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford really lost their competitive edge in the world auto market. Toyota gained it. And in this particular inflection point, the difference in outcome is over 100 to 1. 100 to 1. And, you know, I joke with my MIT colleagues, imagine if you gave a test and you had one student who scored 1 point and another student who scored 100 points. I mean, one explanation for that is like maybe someone is cheating here because of the difference in outcome. But anyway, this is back to what I said earlier. There's this 3 layers of invention, 3 layers of innovation. The benchtop, the object in front of us, the instrumentation we use to manipulate it, and then the social overlay. And when we get differences in outcome like this, I would suggest that suggests the power of that social overlay to really have profound impact on outcome. Before I end, I want to share just a few more of these models by which we manipulate the social overlay, manipulate the social circuitry of who communicates and collaborates creatively with whom. So another model I want to introduce is this idea of center down versus top down versus center out. Top down versus center out. So, you know, many of the companies represented in this meeting have operations which are distributed, a factory here, a factory there, a mine here, a mine there, whatever it happens to be, an office here, an office there. And there are multiple ways to think about the management of these distributed operations. One is portfolio, which is the factory over there in Region A does whatever it wants to do in Region A, and the factory in Region B does whatever it wants to do in Region B, and the Region C does also its own thing. And one of them will be successful and one of them won't be, but it sort of balances and averages out. It's a risk diversification strategy. Another strategy is top-down, which is the headquarters. It assumes that it has the technical expertise, it has the business model expertise, it has all the necessary expertise. And what it does is it tells those on the operating edge, the distributed operations, what we want you to do is wait for us to tell you what to do. We will look at the problems in front of us, we will generate solutions to those problems, then we will project those solutions onto you, and then once we do that, of course, we will make sure that you adhere to what we prescribe. We will monitor you to make sure you are adhering to what we prescribe. But it's really this push down sort of the lofty expertise way up here to the unwashed masses down below. That's a second strategy. A third strategy, and this is the one I'll talk to more about, is this idea that the center looks at a situation and says, this is really a new situation, either because the technology is changing in such a way we just don't understand the technology, and the competitive environment is changing in such a way and we simply just don't understand the environment. And for us to try and push out solutions, we're not taking full advantage of the distributed intelligence of our organization. And so in that case, in this center out, what quote-unquote leadership does is set themselves up as a conduit, as a facilitator. So if they get information which the operating edge might not get, they share it. If they have insights from the one part of the operating edge, let's say Site A, they inform Sites B and C of what they've learned, and they become a facilitator of this much broader networked conversation of co-discovery. And I'll give you two examples of that. So in the United States, when COVID hit, March of 2020, we all had to retreat to our houses. It was almost like out of a horror movie where you were afraid to go out on the street. You didn't know what was lurking over someone else's shoulder. And we were told that the path to freedom was two steps. Obviously, the vaccine was a major step back to some measure of normality, face-to-face, engagement, that sort of thing. But a halfway step was testing, that if we could test people in a reliable fashion and see who had the virus, who didn't have the virus, we could have a better sense of who could go out and who couldn't go out. Now, in the United States, rightly so, there was a lot of celebration of the speed with which the vaccine was developed, actually several vaccines, and fairly wide availability. But what was criticized was the speed with which the testing came out. And Europe was testing way earlier than the United States. And when you look closely as to why that might be, because one would think a test is technologically easier than a vaccine, what we see in the United States government is a very sort of bifurcated approach to dealing with the problem. Our Centers for Disease Control, they said, oh, we're the experts. We're the experts. We're the world experts on infectious disease. And we know how to test for infectious disease. So what we're going to do is tell everybody else we're not using your test. Actually, don't even bother developing a test, because even if you do, we're not going to use it. And in fact, that's what we did. And so the Centers for Disease Control said, with the limited budget, and they didn't say this exactly, but with the limited budget we have, with the limited number of brains we have, the limited number of capacity, we're going to take on for ourselves all of society's opportunity to develop tests. What happened? Our tests were slow, they were late, they were expensive, unreliable, unavailable, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, the Food and Drug Administration, which is a separate part of the US government, said, vaccines. We know a lot about the science. We know how to ensure safety and efficacy, but actually design a vaccine, why would we even think that that's our job? We have all these marvelous pharmaceutical companies. Carl started with a picture of the number that are just within that 1 mile radius of MIT. There are dozens right there. They said, you know what? We'll have a free-for-all. Everybody, go ahead and try and invent a vaccine. And we'll give you the leeway. There was a financial incentives, risk reduction with Operation Warp Speed. Everyone, go ahead and try and invent a vaccine. And as you do it, though, all we ask is tell us what you're doing and what you're learning so we can share that out into the network. And so this, instead of a top-down approach, the Food and Drug Administration took a center-out approach. And as a consequence, the vaccines almost caught up with the tests in terms of broad general availability. And why was that? The CDC had maybe a few hundred minds attached to the problem. The FDA on the right-hand side, they had tens of thousands of minds and creative inspirations attached to the problem. And any time you have a contest where, on the one hand, you have thousands, tens of thousands, millions of minds attached to a problem, and on the other hand, you have a few dozen, a few hundred, a few thousand, the millions are going to overwhelm the few thousand every time. Just to, let's see. Oh, that's a good question. Anyway, take a vote. As we go, let's see, where are we? So just a quick example, and we'll share this in the slides. The same problem happened with our school reopening, that our major cities, by and large, failed to reopen their schools. That said, there were a few districts that were able to reopen, and the numbers are staggering. We have 51 million schools in our, 51 million students in our public schools in the United States. Now, March, everyone had to stay home. September, barely a fifth of the students were back in person. Even by January, about a third were back in person. And even by the spring, less than half the students, less than half the students were back in person. And the costs are staggering, the social costs for the development of children. Kids who didn't go back, we've lost 1 million children. We simply don't know where they are. They didn't come back to school. They weren't showing up every day. They weren't on the records, et cetera. They're lost. We have to find 1 million kids. Some schools did open, and I can share with you a resource on this, but the key point was the ones that stayed closed, the mayor, the governor, the Board of Education said, no, you can't open your school. You can't open your school. We're going to come up with a plan. We're going to come up with a policy which we'll try to fit on everybody. But they never did. And so Boston stayed closed, New York stayed closed, Los Angeles stayed closed, Minneapolis stayed closed. Now, in Wisconsin, right next door to Minneapolis, that county said, well, what do we know at the headquarters about opening during COVID? The answer is we don't know anything. So what they said is, they said, superintendents, why don't you guys try and figure out some solutions? And the superintendent said, principals, why don't you guys and gals try to figure out some solutions? And they said, teachers, why don't you work with your students and your parents in March and April and May to try and figure out some solutions? And so what happens is that those schools which took a center out, those school districts that took a center out approach, they were able to open in September. They were operating almost entirely in person by October, and by November, all their kids were back. And they stayed safe. So anyway, what I just want to conclude here is that we are repeatedly facing these periods where everything seems to be in change. Everything seems to be in flux. And certainly 2021 is like that. We've got the COVID still going on. We've got digital disruption. We've got climate change and concerns about that. People are meeting in Glasgow this week trying to figure out what the new rules of the game are. So that's all going on. The competitive environment, the technological environment, that we're all changing. The one thing I'm certain about is when we go out 5 years from now and we look at those who succeed, two things. One, those who succeed will succeed in ways far greater than everybody else. And the other is it'll be some surprises. And the other thing I'll make a prediction on this is when we go back and say, how was it possible that this company we never even heard of succeeded so brilliantly? With all these changes going on, both technological and competitive environment, we'll take a look and realize that they had done so much more in constructing this social overlay, the social circuitry, to engage the collective wisdom, the distributed intelligence of their whole organization. And those that seem to be positioned to win, but don't, looking back from 2025, what we'll discover is that they took approaches which did not harness and did not take full advantage of the distributed intelligence of their enterprises. And so what I'd just like to, again, is conclude with thanks for the invitation and the encouragement for all of you as you're looking from November 2021 forward. One question to ask yourself every day throughout the day is, whose mind am I not harnessing towards the problems in front of us? And if each day you can find 2, 3, 5, 50 people, say, oh, I've got to include them too, you're more likely to succeed than not. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Spear, for such a remarkable presentation. Well, I'm trying to put the jingle on. Our next speaker will be Professor Luis Perez Breva, MIT Faculty Director of Innovation Teams Enterprise. He will talk about inventing and building technology organizations systematically. The floor is yours.
Bonjour. That's about as much French I'll say as I used today, but I'm really happy to be back here I haven't been in Paris for 15 years since I finished in the École Normale, since 2004. And so I'm really glad to be here. It's one of my first destinations outside of Boston since the pandemic started. It's also been 2 years since I did talks in person, give or take, so I'm a bit rusty. I apologize for that, but hopefully you'll be kind enough to kind of allow me some leeway. I'm here to tell you about some of our work over the last 20 years, about how to build companies, organizations, systematically using technology as a tool. And before I start, I want to show you a few ideas. So first, we do have an opportunity to think about innovation very differently. The opportunity has been given to us by the fact that pandemic has essentially put a reset on absolutely everything we do. So I want you to think about, what do you want innovation to mean? And this is a question I want to ask you to keep in the back of your minds for the rest of the talk. Is it a skill set? Is it a way to progress in the face of uncertainty? Do you want it to be a way to use technology as a tool for that progress, etc.? Or would you rather go to old ways? Think people talking about predictable disruptions, minimum viable ideas, an emphasis on products. So which is the way you would like to conduct? I'm going to announce that I'm incredibly biased towards the top of that slide rather than the bottom. And so I'm going to make my case today for why you should start thinking about it in another way, or at least offer you an opportunity to think about it. So part of the challenge is it's really hard nowadays to make sense of a litany of words that seem to all mean the same. And I've put them all in here: incubators, accelerators, data, technology, startups, innovation, problems. And so we are essentially awash with buzzwords. And so what I want to share with you is, scratch that for a second, all those buzzwords. I want to tell you about our story, the story of what we've been doing for the last 20 years. So for the last 20 years, we've been obsessed with this one question, which is, how do you do innovation? Not how it threatens what you do or how it happens elsewhere, which are all both very important questions, but actually, how do you do it? Right? And it turns out it's actually different from what most people think. It's much easier. So there's a chance I may sound a bit contrarian throughout the rest of this talk. That's not the intent. So before I actually go dive in, let me show you the context in which all of these ideas have emerged. So for the last 20 years, I've been doing innovation, and I've been doing artificial intelligence, which means I've been interested in the idea of how to bring technologies to solve problems that matter. So technology as a tool, not a product. And I've also put it to practice by actually building companies that, in my case, used artificial intelligence in unsuspected places. I want to point 2 examples there. There is 2 companies that show what I did: Flagship Ventures and Polaris Wireless. Flagship Ventures is a venture capital firm that invents companies. Notice I didn't say invests in companies, that too, but also invents companies. And what I did there is set up a process to do that systematically. Flagship Ventures is also known for being the company or venture capital that invented Moderna. We can talk about that later on. The other thing is Polaris Wireless is a company I started 20 years ago that locates cell phones in case of emergency using AI and the existing infrastructure. And the common thread here is that we're inventing from things that we already have. So that's one part of the experience. And you see, I've done this in a bunch of other places. You see at the bottom. The other part of the experience is that over time with MIT and outside MIT, we've set up this process that I now call innovation factories over the world in over 30 different places. At MIT, our very own is set up as a class, a hybrid of a class and a work experience, in which we've seen over 200 different research breakthroughs over the 15 years, and we've seen them go to all kinds of industries. And what prides me of these is not so much whether method works or not. What prides me is that we actually get to train people while doing it. So this is something that can be taught. And it's not prescribed, meaning that you can start with a technology that might have been thought to be bio and end up with an energy domain company, organization, or license. It doesn't need to be a startup either. And lastly, these ideas are available as a book. This is my publicity moment. So if you guys are interested in the ideas you're going to hear today, you can have them. We made a point when I started doing this that everything we do should be incredibly accessible. So both the book is free of jargon, the courses and the offerings we do online are also free of jargon, so that they can be understood by people from all the disciplines, which are the people that I routinely talk to at MIT from across all campus. So now I hope to have done enough to persuade you that even though I'm going to look very contrarian, there is a body of work behind it that justifies my right of being a tiny bit contrarian today. And so with that, let me get started. So there's two things that most people get wrong. Now, there's this obsession, this mantra of failing fast, that to me makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The observation I have is that the companies that actually survive do so because they fail to fail. And so I frankly, even though most of the advice my students get is that they ought to fail fast, one of the things I need to disabuse them of is the fact that when you fail fast, what you're practicing is failing. And what you should practice is how to figure out the way you don't fail at all. So that's one piece that confuses all of my students and the companies I work with. The second is this very strange mantra that came from the lean startup over the last 15 years, and it was only the last 15 years in which people actually started to think that spending little by little and running small experiments was the way to innovation. And I want to actually disabuse you of that notion too, because the fact of the matter is that spending little by little is also a tried and tested method to waste an enormous amount of money. So, which is it? How should you think about this? Why did these things get to be so popular? And what am I talking about? This is a bit abstract. Let me show you a couple of examples of what I mean with this. So, this is the process. This is a depiction of the process that we've all gotten to associate with innovation over the last 15 years. And again, it's only the last 15 years. So what you see at the top, there's a diagram that explains how the venture capital industry thinks about the process of bringing technologies to the world as startups. There's nothing bad with this process. It's just built for investors, which have a specific set of needs. So most people think that you start with some kind of pitching, incubators and accelerators. All of this happens right around here, and it's all just about getting your idea in a better shape. Not about progressing the idea or testing it, but just making it look prettier. Then you have some kind of due diligence and some seed capital. And the goal from this point onwards is to just simply pass the investment on to the next investor until you get the serious whatever, right? So this is the method by which the venture capital industry has pushed startups into society. Now, I don't want you to think I criticize this method. There is a reason why they do that way, which is that the investors owe themselves primarily to their limited partners, which means that their purpose is not to bring innovation to the world, but rather to return their capital to their investors. And if they don't do so, they're liable for fraud. So this system is set up to satisfy that boundary condition, which is not the boundary condition of companies, organizations, or entrepreneurs, or doers. As a doer, or essentially as an inventor, your objectives are different from these ones. And so it pays to think whether we need another process. But it's also interesting, even from a pure outcome standpoint. So what you see here at the bottom is a few numbers to help you realize where innovation comes from. And as Steve put before me very nicely, innovation doesn't really come from this venture capital industry, no matter the reputation they've acquired for it. Rather, it comes from elsewhere. And just a simple comparison, in 2017, the venture capital industry moved $75 billion in the United States. In that same year, philanthropic capital moved $370 billion. So Americans are 5 times more likely to give their money to philanthropy and not get any return other than social good than they are to put their money into venture capital. And that's an important statistic. It means that we still, in this world, no matter the news, we'd rather have something that does good and hopefully also help us do well than just do well alone. And that's an important consideration. The other thing that it's important for us in a corporate setting, but also as innovators, is that this process above, which has its place and its reason for existing, is really bad for everybody but the investor, because this process accepts the idea that we should waste 9 out of every 10 things we do. It's built into the process. From a financial standpoint, if one outweighs all the other losses, you're good. But from a personal, people, and invention standpoint, that's a horrible process. From an engineering standpoint, you would never accept a process that fails 9 out of every 10 times. You would go to quality assurance, right, in some way. And I want you to capture those ideas there, because then there's got to be another way. But to anchor this point even further, let me just give you one more, sorry, wrong slide, give you one more data point. So this is a table I produced in 2017. Haven't updated it yet because with the pandemic, all statistics are somewhat distorted. But so in 2017, this table reflected some of the very famous startups or great organizations of the time, and the money they had to raise before they went public. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because there is this legend of minimum viable promises and innovation for pennies, as I like to call it, that has resulted in a belief that you just go around trying things out and then see what happens, which effectively brute force, right, little by little. And so earlier I was making the point that this is actually a recipe for waste. And now I'm not even going to make the point again. I'm going to ask you to think of yourselves having an innovation project and going to your board to ask for money for it, and following a process that requires you to go to your board 23 times in 9 years to raise $24 billion, right, so that you can actually create the company that you want. And so my lesson to you is that if you don't have the stomach to go to the board 23 times to ask for money, or you are not expecting to be able to gather $24 billion, there's got to be another process. Because this is what it took Uber, and we all know Uber is not profitable yet, right? So this is just part of the story as it was in 2017. So what do we do? How do we change this? What do I tell my students? What I tell my students is that there's another way. If you're an investor that doesn't have any information, you are bound to use that process. But if you do have information, or you are a doer, or you're a corporation, there is more you can do than simply spread money in all those bets and hope for the best. In fact, the reason why failing fast and investing little by little picked up is because to investors that have no other knowledge and are external to the action, that's the best way to essentially spread their investment. So they hope to invest little by little, see what happens, and they hope that the uncertainty will go away fast. And that's why that's become so popular a mantra. But for you, it doesn't need to be that way. So I'm going to rephrase the question I asked from the beginning. What if there was a way to meaningfully test and de-risk innovation concepts? What if there was a way to use your money not to see whether your idea is any good, but to actually stress test your idea and make it so that you get to prove that it will work at the next scale before you go and ask for more money? So spend whatever money you need to prove that this will not fail in any way that's predictable, and then see what happens. Is there a way to do that? Could we test meaningfully 10 concepts of the capital it takes today to fail predictably at 1? And so on. You can read the rest of the slide. So it turns out there is, and I'm going to tell you about it. But before I go into it, I need to at least share a bit of the mindset one needs to adopt to see innovation under a different light. And so if we were in a class, I would show you 50 examples, and I would kind of get you numb with a lot of examples. Today I will just do a couple one is this one. I typically show this slide, and I would have, in non-pandemic times, where people are allowed to shout, not today, but in non-pandemic times, I would have you vote, or ask me, or tell me out loud what you think this is. Normally, I would get responses like this might be a servo motor, a comb, a music machine, like a little whatever. I would get all kinds of responses like this, many. You can see for yourself, this is some kind of gizmo that's about the size of a pen, and it is atop a desk, so it's clearly at least not that heavy, right? And if you had been there when this was first presented, that would be the impression you would have gotten. That this was like they might even have turned it on and burned something with it, at which point you would have said, okay, fine, this burns things, so what, right? So then I show the next picture, which is this one. And I ask the same question, right? And most people then respond to me immediately, laser, 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 applications of laser, so on and so forth. And I said, well, this is our problem. This right there is the expression of our problem. This was the first laser, the very first laser. When this came out, a laser was not even an innovation yet. It was some kind of invention, strange invention by some people that didn't know what they wanted to do. Actually, this has gotten to be one of the biggest problems with innovation. This obsession about which one was the innovation expresses a 20-year gap between these two. And the problem really is that we remember innovation by their products, but that's not the way they look when they start. So there's 20 years trying to persuade people about, at least in the old lore, about products. But of course, that implies guessing, and guessing doesn't really, well, I mean, it's okay to guess. What's problematic is when you take your gas with you to your grave, right? And you just keep on holding on to your gas as opposed to kind of seeing it as an initial assumption, maybe. So that's one of the problems I share with my students, which is that this is what I call product myopia. We think of innovation by its products, and we forget all the organizational building, exploration, and rigorous testing that went through, much of which the speaker before me, Steven Spear, had told you about. So all that is more important. All that experimentation and organizational building is way more important than the particular product you conceive of or you imagine it works. Most importantly also, it turns out there's not just one product. There's plenty. You could build from a laser, and we know that from the lasers do, and from many other examples. Let me show you another example. So this was about with technology, obviously technology. So my next example, oh, sorry, before I do that, I forgot to tell you, there is actual beginnings, the real. So how did the laser really start, right? And that's an incredibly valuable lesson. I almost forgot. Thanks, slides. So one of the things the inventor of laser tried to do is what he quotes in there. This is a quote from one of his interviews in the 1990s. What this quote essentially says is that if he were alive today, he would have bought every part from Amazon. That's about what the quote says, and put it together as a pet project. And this was the very first laser. So interestingly, nothing about the first laser was actually new. This is really important. This shocked me enormously. So, another example. This is Greenpeace, at least the beginning of Greenpeace. And I'd like to show this example because it's the other extreme. Greenpeace is an organizational development. They invented, or virtually invented, the business model. They invented an organization. They leveraged technology that was reasonably new at the time, such as ham radio and a bunch of navigational improvements in ships. But their first version was effectively using billboards, a ham radio in a house of someone, a benefic concert to actually pull funding, and they fleeted a ship, a fishing ship, to try to go and stop the United States from testing nuclear bombs near Amchitka. Now, what's interesting about the story is that it's an organizational story that looks like totally preposterous. A bunch of what looks like lunatics at the time took a boat to stop the United States from testing nuclear bombs. Right? That's fairly dramatic. Interestingly, it is a phenomenal organizational development, so much so that when they were done and they didn't succeed at stopping the United States, they still succeeded at actually persuading society that the planet was in danger, which was their goal. So they said, wait a second, this actually works. So they copied the model, and from then on, they've actually been reproducing the exact same model every single time. And it is a story of innovation because it uses technology and organization to actually solve a problem that mattered to these people and matters to us today. Tesla would not have been possible in a world in which Greenpeace had not existed first, or an equivalent, so that we learned that the planet was in danger. So that's their impact. But again, not only were the parts not new, in this particular case, even the idea was old. The idea itself had been tried by another group of lunatics 10 years earlier that tried to stop the United States from testing nuclear bombs too with a boat. In that case, it was a sailboat. They were arrested too. They just didn't have a ham radio. So I guess that's the role of technology, right? So you've seen these examples. The whole summary of this part of what I want to tell you is that this is true problem solving. So what these people did, and what we need to do with innovation, is true problem solving, not the kind of problem solving that we learned to do in math class. In that kind of problem solving, the professor had figured out that there was a problem, had figured out the perfect way to phrase the problem so that you could pretend play to problem solve. But this is real problem solving. The problem is not clear at the beginning. The technology needs reshaping, reinventing, combining. And so you need to define every single aspect until you finally get to the solution and to the problem at the same time. And the way you start is you start with what you have. Nothing is new at the start. And the story you live is one of an organization born out of exploring effectively an unknown problem. However, when you're done, you'll talk about the story of a product, the product of all this thinking. That's what creates the confusion nowadays. So with this, now I'm ready to tell you a bit more about the process we have people follow. Now that you see that we come at this idea of innovation in a very different way. And so again, back to the question, whether there was a way to meaningfully test and de-risk innovation concepts. So what this means now, and I can show you with one example, is this same question can be phrased with, oh, there, sorry. It stopped working for a second. There. Compare these two companies. Both are known. Uber, on the left, is a software startup without assets that coordinates cap rights. On the right, you have Moderna, a biotech manufacturing company and pharmaceutical company that runs the whole value chain of essentially vaccine development and mRNA development. What you see at the bottom is Uber has required, before IPO, $24 billion. Moderna required $2.7 billion. This was founded in 2009, 2008, and you read the rest. Their IPOs is about the same time. So these are two companies that started about the same time. One is presumed to be the ones that are easy to scale up, software. The one is the hard to scale up, biotech. And somehow, one costed 10 times less than the other. Why is that? Well, the answer is very simple. This one starts by that process that we've heard about startups. Just ask for money and then grow. This one was born out of an entirely systematic process to actually build and de-risk companies, so that by the time the company was formed and was fledgling, you had at least cleared all the major risks that were obvious. So you were left with the ones that would be obvious only at the next scale. And that's a very different-minded approach to build companies that matter, much more sustainable in so many ways, and also apparently 10 times less expensive. So what does it mean? What does it mean for you? So there's two ways, two camps about how to form companies nowadays. One is finding and shepherding ideas. That's the standard venture capital model. And the important thing there is deal flow. The other one is conceiving and developing organizations, discovering those problems, which is what we heard about. And that side is the Ubers. This side is the Modernas of the world. So I want to tell you about the right side. And I'll do that with one example first. If this is the map from about 1,000 years ago, so it would have been really hard for the people 1,000 years ago that had this map to guess that they were missing a continent, right? It was really really easy for us to know that because we've seen this other picture, right? So now we know the product, which is that they were missing a continent, right? But the act of innovation can be actually summarized simply by saying, finding out and building the ships that were required to get to that other continent, right, without ever having seen this picture. The people that got to see this continent did not have the satellites yet to take the picture, right? Rather, they had to build ships and go out with certain moderate amounts of risk and some partial information. The way A.C. Clarke, the sci-fi writer, puts this is one I like, which is that when you ask an elderly scientist whether something is possible and they say it is, it'll probably be right. If they say it is impossible, he is very probably wrong. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to venture a little bit ways into what you would call the land of the impossible. And the last thing is that any sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic. So when you put these ideas into process, or this notion into process, you can come up with something like this, which is the way in which we run all our innovation factories and the way in which we think about companies. And that will get me to the end of my talk. So we start by actually, sorry, I went too fast. We start with exploring and planning problems. We scope them out. Our goal is not to find cute problems only. Our goal is to define those problems, see whether they're attractive, find organizational hypotheses for what we could do in those areas, and most importantly, start the planning for what we'll do next. And what we'll do next is what I call the build to kill step. We spend an entire year in secret, meaning there's no need for you to know that I'm about to kill my own ideas, right? Putting serious resources, typically for a biotech startup, it might be as much as $1 million, right, in the Boston area. Trying to kill that idea. We even formed a company, if necessary, or we use resources and real people, not PowerPoint, and real labs, if necessary, to actually put together the things that we know would destroy the idea. And we try our best to kill it. The principle is very simple. If someone's going to die, it better be the idea, not us, right? And so we do that, and then eventually, if after 18 months we don't succeed at killing the idea, then I guess there must be something there. Most interesting, what you have next is a plan that shows you everything you killed and everything you would need more money to continue killing. And so with that in mind, then you can actually have the plan for proper scale up, because that's exactly what you do when you scale up. You push the uncertainty boundary to the next scale. So that part, we know it works. We've set it up at MIT, we've set it up in companies. The next part of my work is this one, which is what happens with what we don't decide to pursue. There's good information in there, right? So it turns out that what we're building now, what the thrust of my work is building what I call a technology or insight recycling platform. The idea being that if not only you can actually progress in this way when we see the risk, but also you manage to capture true lessons deliberately, not just, hey, I learned. No, real deliberately capturing those lessons, instrumentalizing your own innovation research in some ways. Then you build economies of scale, so increasingly you can actually go for further and more ambitious projects. That's what we call innovating efficiently. We know it works. Manually, we're trying to institutionalize this last part. So let me compare these two things I've shown you. I opened up with the bottom thing, and then I'm closing with the top one. And I want to capture a couple of thoughts here. As you compare these two models for what people consider would be ways to take your ideas further, call them innovation if you want, to competing views of the world. So much they don't really compete because they address totally different markets, but to competing worldviews. And you have some description on the right that I'm not going to see. What I want you to capture in your mind is that words do matter. Failing fast, which has become a slogan and a mantra, it's a horrible thing because it's exactly what you don't want to do. It's the wrong motivation. Now, I understand why people came up with it, and we've discussed some of it, but words do matter. And so diversifying, de-risking, scaling up are real words, right? And so not only do words matter, organizational models matter too. The bottom is an intermediary model. It's the standard brokerage model. I find something there, and I take it here, and I make a profit along the way. And it's a perfectly respectable model. But for companies that are not in the business of essentially brokering or imports-exports, it's not the correct business model. There's another one. The top one, the one I favor, and it's not the only one, it's a managed innovation life cycle. You have a focus on the problem, and you work on it throughout. And you worry about waste. Wasted talent, wasted capital, and wasted ideas. So, to start closing, what this allows me to do is target much more formidable problems. Problems that I find that either increase efficiency, that help me use technology as a tool, that help me empower individuals, and I can face those in the context of an organization. There's examples of problems like this that I could actually tell you about. There's 2 or 3 we're working on right now. One being this thing, and we can do this free of technology in some ways, and just inventing the technology as we go, or mixing technology from various domains. So the top is one about local manufacturing, where we combine mid-scale technologies for manufacturing with modern transportation techniques and software to create a different logistical apparatus, if you want, that actually helps us with a new scale-up advantage. The second one is computing a carbon economy, where we bring together software, computation, sensing technologies and infrastructure, and modern monetary theory, and there is more. So this is a bit of what I'm able to do today, because I look at innovation in a slightly different way. So we have a minute. Let me wrap this up for you. We've spoken about a lot of things, but at the end I want you to capture 2 ideas. One is innovation is about not having to guess whether you're missing a continent and not needing this picture, right? But rather building the things necessary that will eventually get you to the continent or to whatever else is there. Maybe there could have been dragons at the end of the world we would have found anyway. Second thing is that I've told you many, many, many things and many new ideas, but what I essentially want to anchor is the notion that you can innovate efficiently. And so I want to leave you with this 4-principle summary of what I told you today. It is irrational to fail in ways that could have been predicted, fast or not. And by the way, you can actually, there's a piece online on LinkedIn. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you can find this, and I wrote about these pieces, and you can read further there. There's in the face of uncertainty, diversification is the only rational choice. The most powerful asset of any idea is that it's reshapable, and that unless recycled, failed ideas create waste. they pollute your innovating, and they increase your costs in ways that are untold. So that's all I have for you today. Sorry, wrong slide. Please feel free to connect and discuss these ideas. I would be super glad to do so, and I really thank you for welcoming us here in one of our first talks and events in person, coming back to reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Perez-Priva, for such a disruptive approach. Our next speaker is Professor Carlo Ratti. He is the director of the MIT Sensible City Lab, and he will talk about sensible cities. Just a friendly reminder that you can post and upvote questions using Pigeonhole. We will have a Q&A session immediately after this lecture, and you will have the chance to see the answers, to witness the answers to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, and bonjour à tout le monde. Good morning, everybody. So again, great pleasure for me as well to be here with you today in one of the first events in person. So just briefly, I wanted to start with some visions about the future, some vision from over 100 years ago. Today we're talking about innovation, about building tomorrow. And so it's actually some visions by a number of artists in France here between 1899 and 1910. And, they got actually some things right. At the time, they saw mechanization in agriculture coming. They even foresaw at the time, over 100 years ago, Roomba, the little robot that cleans your homes. But they also got some things horribly wrong. They thought that actually this would be the way to move in our oceans, or they would imagine that actually the police in Paris would move like this. And even in your wildest drone dreams, you wouldn't imagine this yet. The point I'm trying to make here is a point that philosophically was made by many people, including the great Karl Popper. And it is, Popper says, the future is open, is not predetermined, and thus it cannot be predicted, except by accident. The possibilities that lie in the future are infinite. So how do we deal with this kind of infinite number of possibilities? Well, in the space we explore, and I'll give you 3 examples today, we like to look at design as a way to explore different future. In particular, what we started calling recently design at large. We all know what design is when you think about architecture design, about urban design, but design at large is bringing together different disciplines in order to tackle some of the issues today. Now, I'll tell you a couple of things about what we focus on. So we like to focus on cities. Just remember 4 numbers about city: 2, 50, 75, 80. Cities are only 2% of the surface of the planet, but they are 55% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable, well, that can be a big deal globally. So that's why we like to focus on cities, but also there's another reason, and the reason is that today there's an interesting thing happening in cities. That's what some people call, with a terrible word, smart cities. We like to call it like sensible cities, but whatever you want to call it, is about the convergence of digital and physical. One way to say it is actually the internet is becoming Internet of Things. The internet is entering the space of our buildings, of our homes, of our cities, and that is changing many things. When you look at production, that's Industry 4.0. When you look at homes, you can talk about intelligent homes. Well, when you look at cities, then it's a space of smart or sensible cities. So that's what we do, and I want to share with you 3 examples about how we try to use design at large, design with multiple disciplines, in order to tackle different issues. The first is a project we called HubCub. Now, today we can look at a city like this. That's actually a beautiful visualization by Pedro Cruz, who was in our lab at MIT. This was a moment in Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it shows you a city using billions of data points, and the city becomes like a living organism. We couldn't see a city like this like 10 or 20 years ago, but we can today. Now, if you take the same data in New York or similar data in New York, this data actually is data that was made accessible by Mike Bloomberg when he was mayor of New York. And I remember Mike Bloomberg in his office, he had a little sign. He recently told me he still has it. It's a sign that went, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And so he used data not only to build a very, very successful company, Bloomberg, but also as a mayor to share a lot of data and allow people to work with it. So we got this data, which is taxi data for New York. What you see here, by the way, which place is this? Any thoughts? Yes, you're right. JFK Airport, so you see every dot is a taxi pickup or a taxi drop-off. If you zoom out, you see JFK was down there, and you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. And so we started playing with this data. It was made accessible for research. And the first question we ask is the following. If you look at those 2 points in Manhattan, if you look at all the trips that connect the 2 points over the course of 1 year, well, that's over 200,000 trips. That makes it, in some days, you got over 1,000 trips per day connecting them. So the question was, how many of those trips could be shared? A couple of things. When we started this, Uber had not launched Uber Pool yet, the sharing on trips. And that was inspired by something I think we all experience sometimes in Paris, in London, in New York. You're at a hotel, you're going to the airport, you're there with a trolley. Next to you, there's somebody else with a trolley going to the same airport. You could have shared the ride, but you simply didn't know that that was the case. So we wanted to quantify that mathematically. So sometimes we say when you got big data, you also need big math. That goes back to this idea of design at large. So here we teamed up with Steven Strogatz, who's a mathematician at Cornell University, one of the fathers of modern network science. And we use network science in order to answer the problem I mentioned before. Here you see these kind of things we call shareability networks that now have opened up an interesting research space in cities. And what we discovered, that you see on the graph up there to the left, is actually quite interesting. That in New York, you can take everybody to destination when they need to be there, give or take a couple of minutes, 1, 2, or 3 minutes. You see there, the maximum delay, the delta is 50, 100, 150 seconds. But you can actually cut the total number of vehicles by 40%. Now, 2 interesting things happen. The first one is that these results actually start a nice conversation in New York. I remember a review in the New York Times. The journalist actually was quite interesting. He said, well, this is interesting mathematics, but you know what, New Yorkers don't want to share anything. It turns out that's not the case. And actually, the results also end up on the desk of Travis Kalanick, who at the time was the CEO of Uber, the founder of Uber as well. And we started then the first collaboration between MIT and Uber. And as you might know, Uber Pool today does exactly this. Allows 2 people going more or less in the same direction to share a ride. Not only that, but Uber Pool has been very successful in New York, in San Francisco, in many cities. In some cities, Uber Pool has been up to 50% of all the rides in the city, and also opened up kind of a global ride-sharing business. So now it's a few tens of billions of dollars every year, but different companies, Uber, Didi, Lyft, and so on, allowing people to share a ride. And the good thing is that this is only software, it's only programmed in the city, but when you do that, instead of 2 cars, you got 1 car on the road, which means less congestion, less energy consumption, and less pollution in our cities. So it was a little story about, again, down at the lab, how you start with data. You take data, you analyze it, you take a digital copy of the city, a digital twin, if you want, and then you analyze it, and you can discover interesting way in which you can actually transform the physical city. And actually, we're working now on a few other things. That's a recent paper we had in Nature, using the same data sets that's actually behind our latest company. Again, how we can use intelligence in order to program and manage better cities. Again, it's a design approach, but it's design that really brings together many disciplines. In this case, not only planning, architecture, design, but mathematics, physics, complex science, and economics. So that was the first example I wanted to share with you. I want to share another example with you, and by the way, I'm sharing examples from different hats. Our lab is where we do all the research in this space, but sometimes you need to turn the research into projects, and that we do with our design office or into startups. And I'll show you a third story about our first company, which is now a unicorn. On the second thing, this is done in our design office, and actually, by the way, I want to mention that we've been very happy with the design office to work with Bouygues on a number of occasions, including in a building in Paris at La Défense. But what I want to share with you here is a project in Helsinki. And so the mayor of Helsinki, a year and a half ago, came up with what is called the Helsinki Energy Challenge. So his problem is that in Helsinki, there's a good district heating system, which is usually good. District heating is very efficient. As you know, you get hot water and you run it through the city. But the bad thing here is actually that the hot water comes from power plants, which today use coal. And the mayor decided by 2030, all the coal power plants are going to be decommissioned. And so the question is, what do you do with the city? Now, he did something interesting. Usually what cities do is the opposite of innovation. When you read something about best practice, well, best practice is the opposite of innovation. Best practice means you look at the past, You look at what somebody else has done, and then you copy that. That's what cities usually do. But best practice is really lock the future into the past. So they're the opposite of trying something new. So the mayor wasn't satisfied with the answer he was getting. He said, okay, let's do something that's very interesting. It's the first time, to my knowledge, that a large city took this approach. And the approach is very similar to a moonshot or something like you might have heard the X prizes in the US. So they put a big prize on the table, big or small prize, and X prize is usually between $10 million, case put 1 million euros. You put a prize on the table and then let people compete and come up with ideas, and somebody will win the prize. So this was actually a year and a half ago it started. Around a year ago, that's when the first submission happened. Then 10 finalists, and then we actually were the winners of the competition together with other 3 teams just a few months ago. And so now we're working with the city of Helsinki, the local utility, Helen, in order to take the project forward. But let me first tell you, so the idea we developed and how it came about. So first of all, as I said, design at large means we need to collaborate. In this case, we kind of coordinated the team, but of course with many different people, both with big engineering groups like, call it Rumble or SBP or Transolar, but also with large corporations, with Schneider Electric, with Danfoss, with ENEL, actually, who joined the team later. OP is a financial institution, Quintopper, to help us to communicate the results to a broader public. So here's a short video, and then I'll tell you a bit more about how the project came about.
We're excited to present to you the Hot Heart, an innovative solution to decarbonize Helsinki. Here is how we'll do it.
Just in a nutshell about how we developed the idea. First of all, the problem. What is the problem? The problem is today the cost of renewable is going down very, very fast. Is the graph you see to the left. Today you can actually produce 1 megawatt hour of renewables across Europe. It depends on the place, but with anything between 15 to 30 euros per megawatt hour. There can be solar, there can be wind. It depends on the local conditions. But there's a big but. By the way, if you have 20 euros per megawatt hour, that's equivalent to something like $30 per barrel of oil equivalent. So it's actually, you're getting energy, and actually a better form of energy than oil for less than half the price of oil today. So prices are going down, but the problem is what you see to the right. The problem is that renewables, as you all know, are very intermittent. Sometimes you produce too much, you got a lot of wind, and you don't consume enough, and you get even negative energy prices, and sometimes actually you produce too little. And then what do you do? Well, you need storage. Now, however, think about the following. 1 megawatt hour, it takes you, again, 15 to 30 euros to produce, but the storage battery for 1 megawatt hour will cost you as capex, as investment, 200,000. So it's super, super expensive still. But in this case, the city, in the end, what do they want to do? They want to use this in order to produce heating for the city, district heating for the city. And so we said, what about thinking about a thermal battery? And it turns out that if you do this thermal battery, as you saw before, these floating reservoirs in the ocean, then the cost to store 1 megawatt hour of heat is more like $200. So there's 3 order of magnitude difference between one and the other. True, you will say, okay, sure, we all know that heat is not is almost from a thermodynamic point of view is like a crime to take electricity and turn it into heat. But in this case, ultimately, we need heating in order to heat the city. And the cost, as I said, is much lower if you think about batteries. So this guy works, so you produce, and also is compatible with different mixes of energy that will happen in 2030. We still don't know exactly the right mix, but you use this as a big thermal battery, you equalize, and you run it through the system. And then, as you saw, there's 2 advantages, 2 bonuses. The first bonus is actually you help equalize the whole grid in Finland, and it also has a nice value because you help really when you got peaks. Basically, you got a lot of electricity. Instead of getting to negative energy prices, when energy prices are low, you just turn it into heat and you put it in the hot heart. And the other thing, as you saw, is that you got all this pool of water. Well, it's all insulated, so you're not losing the heat. But why don't we use a little bit of it, not much, in order to create an experience for people. You saw it, this kind of floating tropical forest. But for us, an experience to teach and educate people about climate change, about energy. The only way we can tackle some of these big challenges is if we are all together and share and understand what is going on. So I'll go quickly. This is where it will be located. Here is a more detailed image of this kind of reservoirs in the ocean. Here again, you see them like this. We propose 4 of them to cover with the dome. Those are very lightweight domes designed by Schleit Bergermann, greatest, really good German engineers for lightweight structures. And with 4 tropical forests from Central America, from South America, from Africa, from Asia in there. But again, it could be other things like an experience and in order to teach people about energy and climate change. And so here you see some of the possible images inside. I will not get into the detail how this is done, but actually there was quite a bit of development as well and innovation in the way you do this. They're almost like bicycle wheels. There's a bit of pre-compression that actually made it stable so you don't have buckling. And all of this is done with standard pipes like the ones used for pipelines. So in a nutshell, what can you do with this? It's interesting. You can do before 2030, 2 years before, you can actually decarbonize the whole system. You get all the gigawatt hour that you need in order to, gigawatt hour per year, the heat produced that you need in the city. The cost actually is going to be 10% less. Despite an investment of around $1 billion, based on all the simulations so far, it looks like you can produce this for around 10% less than today. And you got this kind of two kind of bonuses we mentioned before, both about load balancing the grid in Finland, and also to create an experience for people to learn and enjoy the space. So again, this was a second example about design at large, how again you can bring different people together in trying to tackle wicked problems. And by the way, most of you really are very engaged with cities. As I mentioned, we've been very happy to collaborate with the WIG group in different capacity, including at La Défense, as I was saying. And so I think one of the big challenges will be in the next 20, 30 years. How can we help cities decarbonize? As you know, most cities are committed to be net zero carbon by 2050. Few cities actually know how to do it. So I think we need many more, innovation challenge and moonshots and similar things to develop ideas to help cities transform. So this was the second example. The first one was about research, using data analyzing and trying to use that analysis in order to transform the city. The second example here is related to design. The third example I wanted to share with you is our first startup. We now have 6 companies between Europe and the United States, 3 in the United States. But this was the first one. I want to tell you the story where we can learn a little bit about that process, the process that Louise very well explained before. Now, in this case, we started looking at Copenhagen. We actually had a partnership between MIT and Copenhagen. And Copenhagen, we were looking at traffic in Copenhagen. And well, traffic in Copenhagen looks like this. You can imagine the face of MIT students going to Copenhagen. As the problem of traffic is actually bikes in many parts of Copenhagen. Over 30% of all trips every day actually happen by bike. And so we were looking at that with the team, and we came out with the following idea.
To the Copenhagen wheel. The wheel that turns your ordinary bike into a smart electric hybrid. quickly and easily with no additional batteries or wires. The Copenhagen wheel allows you to capture the energy dissipated while braking and cycling, and save it for when you need a bit of a boost. Controlled through your smartphone, the Copenhagen wheel becomes a natural extension of your everyday life. The Copenhagen wheel is your personal trainer, sensing your effort level and providing you with real-time feedback about your fitness and exercise goals. The Copenhagen wheel also enhances your experience of the city. It connects you with things a cyclist wants to know: upcoming traffic congestion, road conditions, and pollution levels. Choose to keep your data or share it with your friends and other cyclists through social networks like Facebook. As you ride, you also collect green miles. It's similar to a frequent flyer program, but good for the environment. Elegant, responsive, smart. A new mode of transport for a rapidly changing world. So turn on your life and turn on the city. The Copenhagen wheel.
So this was actually around 10 years ago, but let me tell you the whole story. So everything started with a class at MIT. It started with a class where students actually were working on Copenhagen with the city, and different ideas came up. Interesting, so actually some of the ideas were very similar to what later, this was 10 years ago, later became, different successful apps that you find today. But one idea was this kind of funny looking wheel, like you see there to the right. At the beginning it was nothing else than a funny looking wheel. The idea that it gets your energy and gives it back to you, but not really any technology, you don't have any idea of how to do it. But we thought this funny looking wheel could have had some potential. And again, it was mentioned before, if you are in doubt, well, if in doubt, let's try it out. Let's see if this could actually work. So this was the first prototype. We put together a few pieces of steel. Today, as you know, is very quick. Maybe 20 years ago would have taken longer to prototype. Today you use digital fabrication, or everything is digitally produced, laser cutters, 3D printers, and so on. So quickly you get this. We put together the batteries, the motor, combine everything. Didn't look very good, but we brought it to Copenhagen. It was working. That's actually the main square in Copenhagen with the mayor Ritt Bjerregaard at the time. So she liked it, and we say, okay, then let's study it in more detail. As it always happens, innovation is a matter of going back and forth. So we went back to the drawing board. We clarified the brief, as you see here. We tried to understand really what we wanted to achieve. We redesigned it fully, combining everything together into the same package, as you see here. Looking at other things, how do you do casing and spoking? This was the first prototype. It looks really terrible. This one was another idea, but this doesn't work. We tried it, but it doesn't work because if you look at this, if you're an engineer, I think many of you are, you see that actually the torque from the center to the outside doesn't transmit because you don't have enough bracing. And then we came up with this kind of spokes that would touch the hub and then move around and go back to the rim. Some people thought it would work, some people thought it wouldn't work. But again, if in doubt, let's try it out. You can very quickly do a 3D model. That's cardboard. You can send this to a printer. You get a 3D printed model. Again, this is super quick. What would it take much longer in the past? So we tried it. We spoke it. He was very skeptical, as you can see. But actually, this worked. So actually, this became the way to do the spoking, so to connect the thing. And then, of course, you had to design the app. I'm going a bit fast. That's all standard stuff today. You control the whole wheel from the app. And so you do a little bit of interaction design and put all the pieces together, including the data component, as you saw in the video. So how you can actually use the wheel in order to collect data from cities. And believe it or not, today people do things like this. They actually use a lot of sensors on bikes. We didn't want to go down this route, so we actually wanted to do something very small we could put on the wheel. So you see it here, actually, with just a few sensors, can collect a lot of information about the CO exposure, noise level, NOx, particulate. And then, just a few bikes actually very quickly cover the whole city. That's actually something interesting we discovered mathematically later. I will not present it today, but actually that mathematically just a few probes moving in the city give you a lot of information about the city, and so you can very quickly get a very, very good grasp of the environmental situation. So having done this, we had to do a few prototypes to send to Copenhagen. So again, you do this in a small series, combine everything together, and then program it, and finally ship it. This was presented in Copenhagen. This was the mayor again before. And you see now this was the first trial of the wheel in Copenhagen. Whoops. I think the video, apologies. Something happened with the video. It didn't start. But anyway, the first child of the wheel in Copenhagen. Now, that had been very successful. Everybody started talking about the Copenhagen wheel, so we started a company, as it usually happens. Actually, one of the beautiful things about MIT is how people are not only encouraged to focus on the best possible research, but to turn it into something that can actually make a difference in the real world. And I think, in many universities in Europe, my experience is actually that people say, okay, you need to prioritize one over the other. I remember a beautiful letter sent by Raphael Reif, our president, to all of us a couple of years ago that was, yes, we need to publish in the top journals we can, have the maximum impact, but that also means impact also means to turn things into the real world. So here we started a company that's actually
is the Copenhagen
a
Wheel.
product now.
It turns your ordinary bicycle into a smart electric hybrid by simply replacing your back wheel. Connect it to your smartphone, download the app, and you're ready to go. Bicycles are a great way to move around, yet sometimes distances are too long, hills can get in the way, and hard journeys to work may leave you covered in sweat. The Copenhagen Wheel is here to change all of that. The technology was developed over several years at MIT, together with the city of Copenhagen, one of the world's most innovative places for cycling. Its original inventors licensed the technology and founded Super Pedestrian, the startup where we are now working around the clock to bring the wheel to you. Like the best riding companion, the Copenhagen Wheel learns how you pedal and integrates seamlessly with your motion. It captures your energy when you brake or go downhill and gives you a push when you need it with 3 to 10 times your regular foot power. It's easy. Ride it just like a normal bike. As you pedal, the motor automatically kicks in with no additional throttles or buttons. All technology for the Copenhagen Wheel is contained within the red casing, including motor, removable batteries, wireless connectivity, smart locking, multiple sensors, and an embedded control system. Use your smartphone to customize your ride, monitor your physical activity, gather information from your environment to share with your friends and fellow cyclists. And if you're a software developer, you can even create your own biking apps. So whether you carry yourself, your kids, or your gear, hills seem flat, distances shrink, and you can cycle just about anywhere. So transform your bike and transform the city. The Copenhagen Wheel.
Now, what you saw there was actually the product. Now, between this video and the previous one, there's probably 100 man-year of work. There's around probably $10 million being invested in order to get there that we raised through VC. But so we get into the product. And, this was the product. This is the thing. Looks very similar. But then we realized something. Actually, that the wheel was a cool concept. Everybody talked about it. But for different reasons, I will not get into the detail. I think, probably because of the weight, the cost. Our bill of material was shy of $1,000, which means the wheel ended up being sold at whatever, $12.99. And so somehow if you spend that much money, you probably change the whole bike, and it doesn't make sense to change only the wheel. So we were selling quite a few wheels, but not enough in order to satisfy our VCs. Our VCs, actually, some of the best VCs in the US, who are some of the best VCs in the US, really need a much faster pace of growth. And so what do you do? Well, this goes back to what Luis was saying before. If you got something you develop, never waste it. Try to recycle innovation. So the wheel now is not produced anymore. But while we develop the wheel, we actually develop a huge amount of artificial intelligence that gets data from hundreds of sensors on the wheel that share data in real time. And then you use all this information in order to optimize operation. You can use it to do remote diagnostics, which is now common. But we managed actually on the wheel to do remote maintenance. And in the meanwhile, guess what? Like 3, 4 years ago, this market opens up, which is micromobility. And so we said, okay, let's give it a try. We had all this intellectual property that's about how you can control better something or micromobility operation with the wheel. Why don't we actually apply to micromobility, the world of scooters and other small vehicles that's booming all over the world? And so we did that. And that became a resounding success. Actually, Super Pedestrian operates through a brand. We operate through a brand called Link. You see here the Link scooters. And the past couple of years have been a giant, scaling up operation globally. Now operating around 50 countries globally, one of the main players in micromobility. But the interesting thing is that where everybody else loses money. And the point today is that many companies, such as even so the ride-hailing operators, the Ubers of the world, the micromobility operators, have great difficulties in being profitable. And actually, by using data and AI, you can actually turn the unit economics upside down. So that's what has happened. It's been a big success and a great, nice story. And now it's scaling up very fast. This was around last year. Now there's a new round of over 100 million. So that has been the story of Super Pedestrian. And this was actually, as I said, the first company we helped launch, and there's a couple of others in the US and a few in Europe that we've all been doing here. The CEO is Asaf Biderman, who's actually was associate director of the lab. He's still associate director of the lab, but he runs the show. I'm simply on the board. But the story here was actually to show this example, and again, how the thinking of design at large, of design by putting together different disciplines, and also some of the things we heard before about how innovation really happens, sometimes in random ways and through ups and downs. One day you're a billionaire, the other day you're broke, and never do mark to market, otherwise you get crazy. But try out, and sometimes you find a successful path, maybe reusing some of the things you developed before. Again, by the way, this is the other interesting thing. I will not get into the details. This is initially started with an MIT patent that we licensed. So this is, MIT has a very interesting way where you develop things in the lab, and then you license the patent, and the patent can become the beginning of a company, in this case, such as Super Pedestrian. So I'll finish here, but again, I think there's a very interesting opportunity today to rethink how we do design. And design, going back to the initial slides I showed you, is probably the best way we have not to predict the future, like those artists did in Paris 120 years ago, but try to build it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ratti, and I will ask Professor Spear and Perez Breva to join me at the stage. I think, Anyway, so this is the time for the Q&A, the time we were waiting to see, and I would like to, the doc is the first one to ask a question, I believe. Can I see the questions? The pigeonhole, oh, there we are. So, sorry for that. First question is for Luis Perez Breva. Incremental innovation is the bread and butter of corporations. How do executives react to your talk? What advice would you give them?
That's a great question. The first advice is buy my book for the entire company. That's a great piece of advice, rarely followed. But so the short answer is that, one of the first things I realized when I came up with that example of the laser, which was a very strange discovery 15 years ago, that interview, is that people like to talk about incremental innovation and disruptive innovation as if they were different, but they're only different at the end. At the very beginning, they look the exact same way. And so what matters isn't so much whether what you think you're doing is incremental or not, but rather that you have a process where you're not wasting your time. And so when I discuss this with executives and with innovators, it turns out that the agreement is actually quite resounding, that most people, what they want is a process by which they know they're not wasting their time. And most people realize that merely fishing for ideas, which is the other process they've gotten used to doing, leaves them wanting to know how is it that they've got to decide between ideas. So this process that we have them follow, and what we describe as a sort of thinking about building a capability for innovation and economies of scale, very similar to what Carlos said about from his world, what he calls design at large. That capability, building that capability, is more important than the specific cherry picking of ideas, which would be implied by these incremental innovations. So the reaction is very positive. It's also new, and it's also true that we've spent 15 years looking at the world under a prism. That's perhaps not the best way to describe the beginning of ideas, but rather it's the best way to describe the end of ideas, which of course is not available at the start.
Maybe to add a very quick thing is, I want to say, when I was listening to you, and also some of the interaction I've had with CEOs in many countries, there's however, an inherent tension. And the tension is between, imagine you run one of the big businesses, and then most of the people there don't need to take cannot take too much risk. You know, they cannot afford to fail in something. If you're running a telecommunications operation, a construction operation. So on the one hand, you got a part of the business that to think that way, so you cannot take risks. You need to be absolutely sure that things will work in a perfect way. And then, however, the mindset when you do innovation has to be a different mindset, even if you manage to minimize the number of things that fail, but you really need to try and take risks and so on. And actually, managing that and the difference between those two cultures is probably the most difficult thing. And maybe you can talk about this later in continuing the discussion, but I think I've seen different models of companies trying to do it. What usually doesn't work if you just bring both of them together under the same roof, because clearly they're two different mindsets and they will clash. So we'll either destroy one business or the other. But I think how to manage those two in the same corporation is the key challenge, I would say, today.
Okay, I will choose a question for Steven Spear. Steve, can you go into more detail as to what constitutes the social overlay that seems so necessary to succeed?
Yeah, thank you. So, as I said during my presentation, we tend to think of invention and innovation as the thing on the benchtop in front of us or the instrumentation we use. Those things come about, as these gentlemen have so eloquently described, by how we create organizations that tap well into the intelligence available to them. And as I introduced two of, I think, what are about, we have a list now about 8 different frameworks, the commonality of all of them is designing the enterprise, the roles, responsibilities, relationships, interactions in such a way that we're creating an environment in which people can use their conceptual skills well and avoid situations where we overload people's conceptual skills. This is a bit of a pickup on the question addressed to Luis, but I'll just offer it, that one of the great technological achievements of mankind actually has become a terrible metaphor, and that's the manned missions to the moon. Fantastic, giant leap for mankind, as Neil Armstrong said when he put a footprint on the moon. But now when people have giant challenges, they said, oh, we need a moonshot. And they think what a moonshot requires is taking a bunch of intellectual, creative elites, putting them in a room, giving them some time, and out comes the solution. And in fact, that's not how Neil Armstrong ended up landing on the moon. The challenge was set in 1961. The accomplishment was in 1969. But along the way, there were millions of micro-inventions, just as these guys were suggesting. These micro-inventions, this invention, that invention coming together and making a capability. This invention, that another capability, the capabilities being joined together. And so in terms of creating the social overlay, specifically what was NASA's genius was reducing the number of variables that were in play at any one time, reducing the stretch on the parameters around those variables so it was just beyond the frontier of what was known as opposed to this giant leap. And more generally, illustrating that if you want to really do something bold, which has a giant leap outcome, the invention is evident only at the end. What you have to do is create these contained, protected opportunities for people to think and be creative very, very well.
Next question is for Professor Ratti. Carlo, what is the environmental impact of creating heat points in the sea when fishes are extremely sensitive to variations of temperature, not to talk about melting the ice ring?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. Well, maybe I didn't stress it enough, but actually the whole thing is fully insulated. So actually the impact in terms of temperature changes on what is outside is very limited. We got people studying really the ecosystem, but I can assure you that that's very well under control. And that's, again, because the floating reservoirs are fully insulated in the inside. So the beauty about the floating reservoirs is that, again, you got the same pressure. You actually do the reservoir like 1 meter higher than the rest, so you got a bit of, you can have just a stretch membrane underneath, but otherwise, it's really just a piece of ocean insulated and where you store the heat. I saw another question, but I don't know if you want me to answer the other one as well that I saw that it was related to the data. If not, I'll do it. Sure. But I want to say briefly, because this is related also to this, to what we're discussing, and about the cost and the footprint of data. You're absolutely right. There's the data and managing data and processing data requires energy, but two things that are very important. The first thing is actually, if you think about the building, and if you add intelligence to this building, let's not take this building, but any other building that today doesn't have intelligence, then, yes, you might increase because of that intelligence, 1% of energy consumption to run the system, but what you can gain can be 20 or 30%. And actually monitor this and measure this. So somehow, yes, you have a cost to pay, but actually the payback, somehow you can pay back that energy very, very quickly because you can run things more efficiently. And the second thing is actually you can distribute computation in the system, so you don't need to actually collect all the data in a centralized way, but the systems we are seeing more and more like the human heart in biology, are systems where actually the data is collected and processed locally, so you can save a lot of energy because you don't need to think mainframe, collect everything in the same place, which is also much more risky, but you actually do it in a distributed peripheral way.
Thank you, Carlo. The next question is a very interesting one for Luis Perez Breva. How do you know when to kill your idea before they kill you?
It's a great question. So, if all you have is an idea, you should kill it immediately because ideas are born bad. They're indistinguishable from bad ideas. You cannot tell anything at the beginning. So your first job when you have an idea is to build the plan by which you will actually kill it, rather than build the plan by which you will actually fall more enamored with it. Now, most of the advice nowadays is, hey, let's fall more enamored with our idea. Let's spend a time thinking about the ideal market, that whatever, that how big it will be, how many people will like it. And that's useful information, and it has a time where that's very valuable in conveying the story. But when you're actually wanting to innovate, and when you think about the construct, what you build, what is the value of innovating? So what you need to think about is, what is it that you gain from this idea if you were to kill it? Which brings us back to some of the things that have been said before in this Q&A. So what you'll get about it is better information about how your company can handle itself under different circumstances. You'll be able to learn how is it that your idea would have coordinated existing units in your company. So in some ways, the function of innovation, the function of killing these ideas is truly learning more about how your organization can overlay a mindset of innovation with the parts it already has. So that's the value of innovation, not the idea. So as long as people keep on focusing on the idea, then you should kill it immediately because you're not going to get from it what you want. If you truly think about innovation as a means to building future capabilities and exploring your own company's future along, the many infinite possible futures, then what you should do with your ideas is not do a business plan for the success of the idea, but rather create the organization that will demonstrate that it was not worth pursuing it. If you fail at that, then you continue with the idea. If you don't fail at that, you already answered your own question. You kill your idea with the plan you built to actually kill it. It turns out that when you do this in this way and you try things out and you think about, focus exactly about what is it that you need to try out, right, which is exactly what Carlo has said before, then you build enormous amount of knowledge about how your organization would fit in that particular market or segment or product or innovation area that's going to be valuable anyway, regardless of what happens to the initial idea. So I guess after all these things, the short answer to the question is you create the plan. That's the first task. Create the plan by which you will know when to kill the idea with actual experiments and actual data and actual facts, and then proceed going forward with that.
If I can add just a few seconds, something that we are trying to teach our students in the lab, which is related to killing ideas, is today we're exposed to so many ideas. You just go on the internet, you find plenty of ideas. So the very important thing, even more than generating ideas, become, again, understanding a good idea from a bad idea, which is what Hemingway once called the bullshit detector. So we try to teach our students this kind of having a good bullshit detector. Hemingway said at the end of his life, he was interviewed by Vanity Fair, is, what is the most important thing? You say, well, I'm really concerned now that my bullshit detector doesn't work as well as it used to. And I think so what we're trying to do with our students is really try to develop and help them in developing a good bullshit detector, because in this world, with all the connectivity and the accessibility we have to information, ideas really are manifold. We find a lot of them. Yes, we can develop them, and we also find them out there. The tough thing is what is a good idea from a bad idea? What is an idea to kill versus an idea to nurture?
Thank you, Luis and Carlo. Next question is for Steve. Steve, how does Tesla play in the Chevy versus Toyota game? And if I may add, does it mean the U.S. is back again in the car manufacturing business?
Yes, so Tesla's an interesting example because it becomes an example of a protected space, right? Because Elon Musk had the financial resources, the personal commitment to create an environment where he was going to create a high-performing electric car outside of the normal mechanisms by which cars are typically created. The key problem for the Chevy Volt was not the lack of inherent knowledge of automobile technology, for sure. General Motors has a 100-year pedigree on that, nor any of the other sort of core ideas. The problem was General Motors had formed its organizational architecture, the social overlay, had evolved that with the evolution of the dominant architecture of cars. So when cars first got started as a product, there was actually a debate as to what the power plant would be. Would it be batteries, even back in the late 1800s? Was it going to be a steam engine? Was it going to be internal combustion engine one? Then there was a question of what's the metaphor? Is the car sort of a ship with wheels, and there were early cars which actually had tillers for steering, or was the metaphor a horse-drawn carriage, which is again the one that won out? And so as cars evolved as a product and an architecture began to emerge with the powertrain and the steering mechanism and the body and the relationship to all that, organizations formed around that sort of thing. Now, predictably, what happens is that when any of the car companies went to either do a major modification or the creation of a new car, it came through that invention mechanism, and what came out was something which subscribed to the dominant architecture. The example I gave before of Toyota with the hybrid was they took the design team outside of that dominant architecture of product and organization, and so they could come up with a novel architecture for the car and a novel architecture for the organization. And what I would willingly bet is that Elon Musk, when he set up Tesla, he didn't look at General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, or Toyota for that matter, for the process by which they designed. He said, what we want is a car with certain attributes. And he as the product began to emerge, he allowed the organization also to emerge, which is why he has such a popular product today.
Last question is for Carlo Ratti. In the light of connecting several different areas within your design approach, how do you see the rebirth of post-COVID cities?
Sure. Okay, so I got good news and bad news for you. Well, I say good news and bad news if you think about, like a group that focuses on real estate, a lot on real estate, like your group. The good news is that actually cities are back. And actually years ago, everybody was saying, all my colleagues were saying, cities are dead and we're all going to move to the countryside, we live on the top of a mountain. I think I was one of the few people who said that was bullshit. And it was written in an article that was published also in France by Le Monde. It said, well, this doesn't make any sense. We come to cities, we've been coming to cities for 10,000 years. Cities emerged around 10,000 years ago. We didn't have cities before. And then when our ancestors discovered cities, the beauty of cities, the magic of cities, is this kind of magnet that brings us together and makes sure that together we are more than each of us individually. And so that thing was happening 10,000 years ago. The thing went through many pandemics. Venice in the 14th century loses 60% of its population, 60. And still, in the following decades, everybody went back to Venice, narrow streets and theaters and so on, because that magnetic force is stronger than even more devastating pandemics we see in the past. So the good news, again, is cities are back, and this is not the end of cities. All of the talk was effectively rubbish. What I say the bad news or something is that we're not going back to where we were before. So certainly, we're just starting to see a little bit of that. Cities have a lot of inertia. Think about office buildings. People rent for long term, so you don't see the changes so quickly. But certainly, cities are going to be transformed by the pandemic. So they're back, but they're not going to be exactly the same. And for instance, the way of working, the discussion in France is going 2+3 or 3+2. How we're going to manage on-site and off-site. Most people in the US are downsizing their offices. So somehow I imagine in the next few years we'll see very interesting changes in real estate because of this, especially in the way we run our offices, and probably with a bit less space. Different type of designs. We need to redesign our offices. If you need to do Zoom calls and answer emails, no need to go to the office. Go to the office in order to create those connections between other people. Very super quick thing. At MIT, we're actually analyzing the MIT network, how all of MIT, people on the MIT site, on the MIT campus, connect with each other in an anonymized way. And we looked at the impact of the pandemic. If you remove physical space, then our social networks suffer a lot. And I will not elaborate on that, but so basically physical space is very important, we're going back to it, but we need to go back in new forms that are yet to be invented and discovered.
Thank you, Luis. Carlo, do you want to say something?
I just want to ditto that, is that creativity is a collaborative undertaking. We like to celebrate the individual creative person, but actually those are also, I think, misleading and destructive mythologies. And so as we start thinking about creativity being collaborative, a lot of it dependent on chance encounter, broad bandwidth, communication, conversation, then if we aspire to have creative enterprises, then we have to create opportunity for those chance encounters and the collaboration. Yeah, I mean, Zoom is functionally useful, as is email, but in a very transactional way. Very hard that way to have the chance encounter to be creative collaboratively.
Thank you so much for your participation in the panel. Now is the time for a networking break of 20 minutes. Please be back on time. For those who are following us remotely, great opportunity to grab a coffee. Thank you. Welcome back. Please have a seat. We will start in a minute. Please join us at for the panel discussion. So the next session is the panel discussion. It will be moderated by Vince Maret. He is the Innovation Director at Bouygues.
Thank you, Eduardo, and welcome to this roundtable panel discussion. The ways into the future are infinite. Carlo reminded us of this wonderful quote by Karl Popper. But now we would like to come in the next few minutes to dig a bit further, to have a hands-on approach on how and each of every you in this auditorium or online can come back home with concrete ideas on how to improve our societies with innovation. To that purpose, we gathered an impressive panel which combines people from corporation, academia, and startups. And we hope that the fighting and debating spirit will be very lively. In the corporate corner, I'm happy to introduce Carole Desnaux. She's Chief Technical Officer with SNCF. SNCF is a French and international railroad operator. And she and her team are promoting the use of new technologies to improve competitiveness of railway systems. She had an extensive career in the industry in various executive positions in the automotive and chemical industry prior to joining SNCF. Still in the corporate corner, we have Fabrice Denis, his Managing Director of the newly created Building Differently division from Bouygues Construction. You will tell us what it means, but probably referring to testing organizations, as was mentioned by Stephen. This unit gathers the engineering, development, and consulting resources of Bouygues Bâtiment France Europe. An engineer by training, Fabrice held various engineering and executive positions within Bouygues in France, Europe, and Asia. From the academic side are two MIT professors, Stephen and Luis, whom you already know, so I don't introduce them. But maybe from the classified corner, I think that your book, Innovating, still looks for a translator into French. So if somebody wants to volunteer, it will be a highly good read for all of the French-speaking audience here and around the world. And finally, manning the startup desk, we have Fabrice Tocco, who is a French entrepreneur, co-CEO and co-founder of DOEX, a company whose mission is to facilitate and accelerate the exchange of data for the purpose of the development of the economy. So let's dig into our topic with my first question directed to all panelists. But Before that, do not forget to tap into the pigeonhole and ask your questions to our panelists. Don't be shy. Share with us what problems you are encountering in your lives and what challenges you have that are generating by the ideas that we were just shared previously. So the floor will first go to Carole with a very simple question. Can you give a concrete advice showing how innovation can improve not only our companies, but our societies? Carole.
Thank you for introduction. Good morning, everybody. I think railway really is moving ahead today, and we really need the railway for society in terms of decarbonation. Today, railway is already the greenest mode of transport, and we have also some technical solution that we have to replace. I'm thinking about diesel train, and the urgency of climate and the need of having more green transport mode help us to change maybe more quickly our mindset about what will be the new technology to transform railway. So with teams, we are working very hard about decarbonation. Decarbonation for us means hybrid trains, battery trains, hydrogen trains, many change because for example, with battery need to be, we need more autonomy, we need more power, and it's not very easy. The idea, as it had been said before, could be very smart, but after to manage to industrialize the concept is always a problem, and especially in we are a big society and not really easy to move. And so with teams, we always have to push new ideas and to say, okay, is mandatory to do that, and also it's really expected from us, from society, to have to be able to change, and it's very important for us to change because mobility is a need of human. As Carlo said, we cannot live on the top of the mountains and alone. We have to interact together, and people are really want to have mobility. So decarbonation and to assure green mobility is what we will try to do for the next decade for society.
Thank you very much, Carole. So Louis, coming to you from academia. So what concrete and hands-on advice could you give to our audience to help improve their corporations and societies?
Sure. So first, we've discussed already some of it in the briefly. So I'll try to be very brief and get at it from a different angle. So I've been seeing students for a good part of 20 years coming to my class and do innovation. And at first, they really wanted just, hey, how do I invent a product and get it to market? And that was a mindset that occurred. Now we're at the end of that mindset. What I've been seeing for the last 5-10 years is students coming from all over the world. Remember, we're in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but our students come from all over, France, Europe, Asia, you name it. And so my students no longer are interested in products. They're interested in doing good things, impact, real impact. Real impact doesn't necessarily just mean going out and doing protests or whatnot about climate change. It means inventing ways out of things. And how do we go out and invent our way out of this? And so there's a few things that have come together in the last few years that make this now possible. It was not as easy to explain just 20 years ago. So first, there is an enormous amount of technologies ready for us to play with. I like to talk about repurposing technologies. That's actually what I think of my work is doing, is we take technologies that work for something else and we repurpose and reshape them systematically to get them to actually fulfill a new objective. And now with internet, with YouTube, and with people being able to try so many of these things, we can even think of their education as driven by problems. We can even educate people and imagine, forget the old model of universities, or let's reinvent the model of universities, and think about people that come to university to focus on a problem area, a vast problem area they care about. inequality solved with better building techniques, or climate change to equalize society, the economics, or whatnot, and we can actually focus on those things systematically for the first time ever because we have all these technologies available for repurposing. The thing that it takes or it needs, that the concrete advice I'd give, is that we need a slight change of mindset. And I repeat this so often, I'm just going to say it again. Ignore the fail fast idea. Let's talk about what Steve was saying at the end of our previous discussion about moonshots. Not so much what Google calls a moonshot, but the way in which we actually go to space for real. So the way we go to space for real, I take this from a quote from Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, is not by simply saying, hey, we'll go to the moon and then just trying and see whether it works. That kind of lean approach would have high costs in human life and in rocketry, but rather they go to the space station by actually figuring out what might kill them along the way and then planning so that they can survive that. So they survive the trip there and the way back. That conservative mindset is what got us to the moon. So the real moonshots happen by actually bringing this systematic way of being productively wrong and repurposing technologies, reshaping them until we get them to work. So that's the mindset that can help us seize on this particular desire for students to do good and do well.
Thank you very much, Luis. So choose a topic. We have seen mobility with you, Carole, repurpose ideas and technologies. And now staying in the corporate quarter, Fabrice, we would like to know from Bouygues, so how can we contribute in those disruptive times to improving our societies, and what is your team doing to that purpose?
So, as you said, Vincent, I belong to Bouygues Construction in the building part in Europe. So we have around 600 to 800 projects per year. So building differently is kind of challenge. In fact, building industry is a slow evolution industry. It has evolved, progressed quite slowly. Whether we talk about productivity, we talk about quality, safety, time delivery, it has been quite slow for years, for decades. It has been linear, if I follow the topic of today. And in fact, now we have to, instead of the evolution, we have to do kind of revolution. Why? Because there is this urgency regarding the environment that we all know. This is this week hot topic, but this is the main topic. Carbon. Building is a strong emitting industry in terms of carbon. Biodiversity, resources, wastes. So there is this urgency. At the same time, there are strong, very high needs in terms of housings, in terms of schools, in terms of healthcare facilities. So we have to build all over the world. At the same time, the costs are rising, and at the same time, we hardly find blue collars to do the projects. So we are in a very difficult situation, kind of catch-22 situation, injonction contradictoire, we would say in French. And the only way is to do a revolution. At Bouygues Construction, we see this revolution, or we build this revolution on 3 pillars. First, is the impact. We have to reduce the impact of the projects. Low carbon materials or technologies, renovation rather than build new, circular economy. So this is less impact, reducing the impact. But at the same time, that has got a cost. It is generating overcost, and all the clients cannot afford that. So at the same time, we have to work on what we call industrialization. We have to create a disruption in the way we build, we design, we build. This is design for manufacturing, this is off-site, this is digitalization. And we think, or we hope, that it will generate some gain of competitiveness that will help financing the overcost. But this is not enough. At the same time, industrialization cannot be standardization, especially post-COVID. It has to be human-driven. So it has to be usage driven, it has to be architecture driven, it has to be comfort driven. So this is the three pillars that we work on. Not easy. That's why we, for example, we are focusing, putting a lot of energy, resources, investment on timber construction. Timber construction is ticking the three boxes: less impact, industrialization, and architecture usage. Timber construction, in fact, 2 years ago, we decided to reach a goal of 30% of project, 1/3 of the project that in 2030 have to be built with timber. Not all timber, but with timber. Today we are at 3%. 10 years ago we were at 0%. Today we are almost leader, but in 10 years we did reach 3%. In the coming years we have to reach 27%. So it's a big deal, it's a big challenge. It has a lot of impact. We have to train people, we have to change the process to have a more collaborative approach instead of sequencing approach. And we have to do much more anticipation, design for manufacturing, partnership. So timber construction, this is one axis, and we have, I must say, a lot of difficulties on this point, but I don't have time to talk about the difficulties. This morning was very interesting to
we will do this in the follow-up question. Thank you very much, Fabrice, for this very clear vision. Moving to the startup corner, so we have seen that at MIT there's an ecosystem of startups and they thrive and they're required to help. So what concrete advice would you give to the audience, be they startuppers or coming from big organization to improve our societies? And what do you do at DOEX?
So advice could be maybe a bit arrogant, but maybe I will share our vision and experience. Our company is focusing on data exchange, like Vincent explained. So just a few words. We are enabling organizations to exchange data, whatever the type of data, whatever the business model of the data. And I will come back on this point later on. So what we try to push to organizations is innovation through data exchange. It's internally or externally. So it just came, it's not my first company, it's my second company actually with my current co-founder. And we talked about innovation previously in the previous panel. And it's the same way it came. It means that we wanted really to bring something new on the market and something that was upcoming and something we thought it could be a game changer in the future. So when we started the company 6 years ago, the big name was open data. It's still a main trend, but something was coming on the market was the idea of economy, data economy, and it was quite obvious that organizations would like to exchange data, but not only open data but private data. So we started to see the business not as a technical business, but as a way to change the way the company will discuss together. So innovation in data exchange is not a technical matter, it's a business matter, it's a regulation matter, and it's a contractual matter. So we put all together these key items, these 4 pillars of the data exchange, the technical itself, of course, because most of the companies a few years ago, they only see data exchange as a technical matter, but it's not the case. Today it's a regulation matters because you have more and more regulations on the data. For the personal data, you have a GDPR, but upcoming you will have the Data Governance Act and Data Act. They will also run the exchange of industrial data. It's also a matter of licensing, contractualization, and a matter of business model. So step by step, we push this idea to many institutions, organizations, that data exchange was something key for the data economy and Europe, actually, because we are operating from Europe, worldwide, but from Europe. And we push this idea, and step by step, we can see the rise of the maturity of these questions. So we came from a world of open data, and we are more in a balanced world with open data and commercial data exchange. So the process of innovation is very close to what was said in the previous panel. What is a good and wrong idea? And the first thing we do is try to kill the idea. And each time the idea is still there, it means that maybe it's worth to work on it. Some key elements is the ability to have the right organization to push your product and push your innovation. And one motto we have in the company is never give up. Never give up, never give up.
Thank you very much. And so we'll be closing this first round of questions, and I see that there are a lot on Pigeonhole, so we'll move after to this. For you, Stephen, and since we are privileged enough to have MIT professors around the table, I will take one question from the board directly. Can you give a brief definition of innovation? That's a question from the board, and follow up with your advice, or start with your advice on how to make concrete innovation.
Yeah, during the break, Luis was describing his effort to go through a certain book and word by word by word find the actual definition. And I suppose before this we should have done the same with innovation. So I'll wing it a little bit, but in the context of this conversation, innovation represents a delta, a change, and across multiple dimensions. So we tend to think of innovation as being a change on the technology dimensions. What I'd like to encourage you to think about, it's also change on the business model. What do we value? Why? Not only what are we doing, how are we doing it, but why? In terms of linking that to a bit of advice, I think a failure mode is our spending too little time actually understanding the problem space. Who's in that problem space and what actually affects them and ails them. And I'll give you a quick example. So I made reference to the Battle of Midway, where the Japanese Navy, the American Navy arrived. So you say, well, what did the Japanese Navy do wrong? Well, it wasn't in 1942 in June or May leading up to that in the planning. It was in the 1920s where they were too quick to assume the ease and not really understand the difficulty of searching for and evading from your enemy and coordinating with your fleet. And because they so misunderstood the problem space, everything that followed from that in terms of the technology of their aircraft carriers, their aircraft tactics around rearming, refueling, et cetera, all were inadequate for the actual problem. Another example, much of humankind, the experience was one of scarcity. Many of the problems that humans have had through our thousands and thousands of years of existence was due to scarcity. That's not the problem today. In fact, abundance, which is why we talk about climate change, it's abundance and overabundance, which is the source of our problems. Yet we still have problems. I'll give one example again, which is the necessity of understanding the problem space. So there's a fellow I've been in conversation with, a guy named Sean Green. His concern is homelessness in Portland, Oregon. And he says, the problem of dealing with the problem of homelessness is people think homelessness is due to lack of homes. But there are many reasons people are homeless. They may have psychiatric conditions which have gone unaddressed. They may have social conditions. They may have family conditions. They may have issues of skill and capability and the ability to self-support. There are a whole host of reasons why someone can't be in a home. In fact, he gives examples of when communities actually build housing for the homeless, it goes underused because it doesn't address the core problems. And so tying this combination of the failure mode of the Japanese Navy in the 20s, some of our social policies today, is that we have solutions which are developed with great energy, great intent, great consumption of resources and time, but actually don't address the core nature of the problem. And that is because the problem hasn't been lived with and the problem space hasn't been explored enough to truly be understood.
Thank you very much. You want to follow up, Fabrice, maybe on this one shortly?
Yeah, very shortly. We have in the company three core value. The first core value is pioneering spirit. The second is customer spirit. And the last one is team spirit. I can tell you that it's my second. We have hired hundreds of people since my first company. In this kind of innovative process, if you don't have the pioneering spirit, which is quite hard to have, because a pioneer is somebody that is taking risks, but is making sure things. So it's very hard to find. You cannot create innovation. So the pioneering spirit, from what I've seen, is the most important profile you have to get in your team to make sure that innovation will go forward.
Thank you very much. So moving to the board, and I will combine two questions for you, Carole. One is, what did you learn from the crisis regarding mobility? We said disruption, and finally a follow-up, which is, how do you move from initiatives to a real change in business models for SNCF and railroad operations at large?
First, the feedback about COVID crisis. What we have to face last year was just amazing, incredible, and as everybody on the SNCF side, we believe that we were not prepared to face this problem. After that, when we have a look to last year, what we can say is that things that happened last year has been an accelerator of change. What it was amazing is that we asked to people to forget to have mobility for many weeks, and after that, when the freedom came back, they asked for many trains, and all the trains were full, and we have more and more trains and planning. So I think that what we keep in mind is that we need to be able to offer safe mobility for people, and we also have to change for adapt to don't know the word in English, but télétravail in French.
Remote working, yeah.
Yes, and as people find a new way of working, efficiency in this new way of working, and we have to adapt and to reduce the price of tickets for monthly tickets, for example. We reduce the price of 40% for people who are not in the spirit to take the train every day to go to the office. And the other change is that many families with young children, maybe people will have to be in a small flat in Paris or in big cities, decide to move to countries. So we have to develop a new offer in countries.
So rethinking the whole process through usage. Fabrice, I will direct the question to you, and maybe what did you make of the center-out versus top-down approach that was developed in the previous presentation? Does it resonate with you?
Indeed, it did resonate a lot, because in our industry, each project is made of an extraordinary amount of innovation. But at the end of the project, all that is forgotten. So yes, it is resonating a lot to make possible to have this capitalization, this circulation of information. And another point which was very interesting was the protected space. In a big company, having a protected space where innovation, ideas can be pushed. But that means yes, a bit of investment. But this is definitely the key that resonated a lot as well.
Stephen, maybe a comment on this.
Yeah, I was just taking notes that in this industry where you have these projects, top-down is not going to work because of the idiosyncrasies of each individual project, different project, different location, different crews, and all of that. The opportunity, I suspect, there's no certainty, but I suspect that there's enormous opportunity to learn project to project in a real-time way, and certainly going through the cycles. And I also suspect that most organizations which do what you do don't take advantage of that. And in not taking advantage of that, they handicap themselves more than they make more difficult their work than it otherwise should be.
Thank you. So we'll stay in the academic corner with another very interesting question, maybe directed to you, Luis. Is innovation linked to the value of the company? And of course, we are in the corporate world, so the acronym KPI should not have been long to appear on the screen. So what do you make of this question, and how can you help answer it in concrete terms?
It's a great question, because it's true. In business world, KPIs seem to be the center of everything, and the more you go east in the world, the more important they actually become for people to actually understand what's going on. So I'd like to address two parts of the word KPI. KPI, indicators in general, in physics and in every engineering domain, are a means to linearize a measurement. So you can actually tell quickly whether something goes up, then your particular problem is going up or it's getting worse.
Please maybe remind us what KPIs are, sorry, for the benefit of the audience.
KPIs stand for Key Performance Indicators, right? And the basic idea is that if there was a measure you could take that somehow informs you about the progress, that would be great. Unfortunately, innovation is, as recognized by most people, non-linear, which means that it's really hard to linearize in a simple scale like a thermometer, right? Whether if it goes up, what does it mean? Well, we don't really know, because it could be good or it could be bad. So but part of the reason is because people focus too much on the final product. It goes back to the definition of innovation that Steve was bringing up just a second ago. So all this emphasis on innovation is typically just on the end result, on what will happen in the future, on the end part of that change that Steve was talking about. But what you have at the very beginning is the beginning of that change, and the change is going to be nonlinear. So what we've been proposing, and we see that seems to work, is instead of actually focusing on measuring that innovation as if it was the process, what you need to measure is what happens, and I'm going to improvise and use some of Steve's terminology here, but what happens if instead of measuring the innovation at the end, you measure the channel communication that happened across? How much better did you actually learn? How much more do you know about your company at the end of an innovation project? Because that knowledge is reusable. And the more you reuse, it's only a matter of time before you create the economies of scale that will allow you to take advantage of that in an innovation. When you're done, you'll be able to pinpoint back to where it came from. But at first, the focus on the problems and on the sharing of that information in the center-out model that Steve spoke about, I believe is the way you can actually land KPIs, Key Performance Indicators, into the system in a way that informs whether you're actually doing enough to build the economies of scale, or whether you're not doing enough, or you're focusing too much on that guessing of a final product.
Thank you. Please, Steve.
Actually, what was just said about key performance indicators, we have a very practical problem in rail transportation in the Boston area. Is we have the first subway system in the United States was in Boston, and I think we still have cars were from then. But someone decided that we should probably update a little bit, so we ordered new rail cars. One can imagine the contract was written for the delivery of rail cars, a certain number per month, per year, et cetera, et cetera. The problem was that that was the wrong KPI. The state of Massachusetts went to the world's largest maker of light rail and said, we want cars, but the cars have to be modified for the American Northeast, different than elsewhere, so there's modification on the car. Oh, by the way, we want these rail cars to be built in the state of Massachusetts. We don't actually have a factory for that, so the factory has to be developed. The support infrastructure has to be developed. The workforce has to be trained. Again, I'm willing to bet that the KPIs were not on workforce capability, supply chain capability, factory capability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was on rail cars. So now what we have is that in order to keep to the KPIs in the contract, rail cars are delivered, they don't work, they catch fire, they don't run, they have to be rebuilt. And again, to Luis's point, the KPIs of learning are quite different than the KPIs of delivery. And we tend to make these big mistakes that when we start something, we pick delivery KPIs rather than learning discovery KPIs, and so inadvertently sabotage our efforts.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Maybe Fabrice, the startupper, we will ask you this question on the valuation. I think that's what transpires in the question. Is an innovative company does it have a higher value, economic value, in your view, than a non-innovative company?
I was listening to all the panel, and we see innovation in two ways. There is the innovation when there really almost nothing on the market, and you create something that is really new or enough new to be qualified as a really new. That's a way to innovate. There is no other way to innovate. It's to do to redo something that has, but doing it better than others are doing. So there is value in both of it. The other value is to copy better and faster than other companies are doing. But I don't think that it brings a stronger and longer value for the company. So any company that cannot create innovation, whatever the topic, will die one day or another. And I was seeing the questions. There was a question
Yeah,
regarding city,
exactly, and how
regarding
the
city.
value,
And we see that cities are moving differently depending on the country, depending on the city, depending on the way the city is managed. So we can see very innovative city going very fast to try and test new innovations. And other city, let's say, a little bit slower, that are less innovative. Like you can see any kind of company, it's the same business, and you know very well at Bouygues the business of the city.
But do you see trends? You have various clients from various industries.
Yeah.
So do you see trends in the data handling?
Yeah, when we started the company, we couldn't expect that the first customer would have been in the agricultural market, and it was not expected. So what we see, the trend of data exchange is for all the business sectors. There is no exceptions, and there is no specific area also. So it's just a matter of maturity of the player that they want to engage in data exchange. It's not a maturity of business sectors.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're coming to the close of our session, and what I like to do is we have shared so many interesting thoughts going in so many directions, and with the help of the audience, that I would like you to summarize in 3 key words, each and every one of you, what would you be the takeaways that you want our audience to bring back home regarding our panel today? So, Carole, we'll start with you.
3 words. I think I will say visions, empowerment, and mobility. Vision, because I think that we have to identify the problem, to find solution, and also to share the vision with the top management, with teams, with partner, academics, industrials, colleagues. And I think that share the vision is the first step for defining change. After that, empowerment. Ordinary people can do incredible things if they are motivated, and we all need to be motivated, and the empowerment is key, not only on the company, but with all the ecosystem, with startup, with academics, with industrial, because collaborative research is the only way to define a great innovation. And at the end, mobility, but I can go very quick on this topic.
Yes. Thank you. Louis, and maybe we won't have time to detail the 3 words, so you can choose one to emphasize of your 3.
Sure. So I'll emphasize just, the notion of learning as expressed by the pioneering spirit that Fabrice talked about, and by the need to repurpose and recycle knowledge that is generated through the process, which is what Steve and Fabrice have spoken about earlier today.
Resonates with recycling also. And so,
exactly.
Fabrice, the ball is yours for your 3 words, and maybe one you want to emphasize.
Change management, because we are all engineers, and it appears that technically everything is possible, but it is a question of human, first. Second was collaborative. This is a center out of Steve. And 3, that was KPIs, but understood that it must be learning KPIs and not
the good
KPIs.
Yeah. Thank you. Fabrice.
So data exchange, because this word was not existing a few years ago, really. So we try to push it, to invent it, and to make it real. And freedom, because it's not because you have decided and write something on the board that you can change your mind. So I will add new words: freedom to try to test, and not to be afraid to fail. That for sure, and hope, because there is something I usually explain to my team, that when you don't understand something, you just look at the white wall, and there is a response on this white wall.
Excellent. And for you, the conclusive 3 words, Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. I guess my starting point is that our common deficiency is never material, nor is it ever energy. It's knowledge, a practical understanding of what problems we're trying to address, and a practical understanding of solutions that can be effectively deployed. And the way to increase knowledge then is everybody, everything, all the time. That our key KPI is, are we getting the creativity in the inside of everybody? Is it about everything? And are we worried about that all the time? And I think if we answer yes, everybody, everything, all the time, then we have a very positive expectation of creating and being able to deploy new useful knowledge. On the other hand, if we answer not everybody, only some, not all the time, only some of the time, and not about everything, only the things we choose, then I think we have reason for pessimism about our ability to create and deploy new and useful knowledge.
Thank you very much for those very interesting last and final words. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to you all in the audience and in the auditorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince and panelists, for such a great and inspiring panel discussion. We will now start with the startups lightning talks. As Carl Coston mentioned before, we have an initiative called Startup Exchange, where we have more than 1,400 startups, MIT related. And now we have a great lineup of 6 startups from MIT Startup Exchange, but also from or born at Bouygues. 5 minutes each. We will start with Irene Hernandez, founder and CEO of Garaga.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can I have my slides up, please? Awesome. Thank you, everyone. My name is Irene Hernandez, and I'm the founder and CEO at Gattaca, a cybersecurity company that builds decentralized digital identity technology, also known as self-sovereign identity, or SSI. Imagine you wake up in the morning, you reach your phone, and you see 10 charges from Amazon orders you never executed. I'm sorry, you've been hacked. And don't think that this will never happen to you. This happens to one of your users, employees, or customers every 60 seconds, because identity fraud is the largest and fastest growing type of cybersecurity attack. As Warren Buffett once said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. But what's the problem? Current authentication architectures in the internet force users to create multiple users' accounts and passwords and to suffer tedious onboarding processes, while businesses, on the other hand, concentrate so much sensitive information that they have, there are honeypots for hackers, and they're spending millions of dollars in KYC and GDPR compliance. But decentralized technologies allow us, for the first time, to create a new way of managing our personal information. A single digital identity across all digital services worldwide. How does this really work? We empower end users with an ID wallet in your phones, where you can store identity credentials so that you can have passwordless, instant, and government-grade secured access to digital services. These identity credentials, say a national ID, an academic diploma, or your employee card, are digitized according to a new internet standard. They're cryptographically signed by trusted authorities, and they're securely stored in your mobile devices so that you can share them at any time with a third party without the need for further validation and controlling at any time who has access to them. Our decentralized identity platform also includes a credential issuance product for trusted authorities and single sign-on tools for businesses. Too good to be true? The European Commission recently announced a new regulation amendment on electronic identification, and listen to this, in less than 2 years, it will be mandatory for European governments to provide an ID wallet to their citizens. And it will be mandatory for most corporations to accept them as an authentication method. Because governments and universities are currently pioneering use cases. Germany already signed agreements with Spain, the Netherlands, Finland to foster SSI in their countries and in the region. And these organizations are already trusting in our technology. In little under 3 years, we managed to develop a comprehensive identity platform and to deploy it across governments and universities across Europe. We've been advising the European Commission itself to define the technical specifications for SSI in Europe. We've signed a strategic contract with a national European government to pilot our technology, and we're currently negotiating national deployment. We're helping a university consortia that serves over 400,000 students, and worth highlighting this project where we are working with the Spanish government together with the Royal Mint of Spain and 3 universities to issue a national electronic ID and official academic diplomas. Because it's SSI's opportunity to become the linchpin of economic growth that keeps so many private industries interested in SSI. We're currently working on partnership agreements with identity providers such as certification authorities or telecom companies. So happy to expand our partnerships. And we're also eager to work on business opportunities to pilot our technology with governments, universities, banks, and transportation companies. So if you happen to work in any of these industries, please feel free to come to talk to me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene.
Thanks a
Our
lot.
next speaker is Sydney Burks, founder and CTO of Boundless Digital.
So 1 month ago, people across the world were taken into a major panic. And this was because Facebook went down for 7 whole hours. Now, the next day, it's actually the Facebook investors that felt the panic when they realized that this outage had cost the company close to $100 million. And it turned out that this was all because one of their network engineers made a mistake when reconfiguring their networks. This was all due to human error. Now, let me ask you, if this can happen to a technological fortress like Facebook, then how can normal companies protect themselves? How could this have happened? Well, it turns out that network management is a fundamentally complex task, and most of the work today is done manually. And that means human error is a major component. In fact, it was discovered that 43% of all network outages are due to human error. And when outages happen, this costs companies, on average, over $5,000 every single minute. Our mission at Boundless is to get rid of human error when it comes to network management. We've partnered with Cisco Meraki, and we've built a platform which provides end-to-end automation to cover every aspect of the network management lifecycle. And we do this by offering 5 products, which provide automations that target the main use cases which network engineers face. These products cover every aspect of the network management lifecycle. These address tasks such as deployment and initial network migrations, the day-to-day configuration change management, log monitoring, GIST Wi-Fi services, and audit and compliance, as well as access control. So how does this work in the real world? Well, let me tell you about a partnership that we've put in place with Orange Business Services. Since 2017, Orange has resold our GIST Wi-Fi product. And this has allowed them to offer their customers Wi-Fi hotspots with enhanced access control and enhanced security, so that they can more clearly and more easily control who connects to their Wi-Fi networks and how. This offer alone in 2020 has generated 300,000 euros in revenue for us across 65 customers. We're currently furthering our partnership by exploring our network automation and deployment solutions. And this aims to increase the profitability of their managed service offerings by minimizing the investment in human labor when it comes to deploying new networks. By automating these network deployments, we foresee cutting the time to deploy new networks in half, and this will instill and enforce consistency and reliability across their networks, which means the time to recover from downtime will be decreased, and we foresee decreasing the number of downtime incidents by 30%. So what are we looking for? There are 3 types of customer profiles and partner profiles that Boundless can add value to. The first are IT teams who work in large corporations. And these will typically manage networks that span a large national footprint or a large global footprint. And these IT teams will be looking for ways to increase their ability to manage day-to-day operations without increasing their team size. Next, we work with managed service providers. And these are companies or teams that manage the network and infrastructure for dozens or hundreds of customers. And they will typically be looking for ways to offer new value-added services to their customers so that they can increase their revenue and profitability. Finally, we're open to working with system integrators and telecom providers. And these will be looking for ways to deploy new networks more efficiently using automation to execute this process more effectively. So if it sounds to you like your company can benefit from automation, and it's important to avoid the high cost of network downtime, then please come speak to me after the conference, or feel free to reach out to us at contact@boundlessdigital.com. My name is Sidney Burks, and I'm the founder and CTO at Boundless Digital. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Sidney. Now the next speaker is Maxime Amran, research scientist at Interpretable AI.
Hi. At Interpretable AI, our mission is to take the guesswork out of artificial intelligence. Interpretable AI is a software company that provides analytic solutions for businesses that have state-of-the-art performance and that are completely understandable by humans. My name is Maxime Amram. I am a research scientist, and I lead the market expansion in the company's Paris office. The company is led by Professor Dimitris Bertsimas, who has been at MIT for more than 30 years. He has extensive experience teaching, researching, and solving industry problems using analytics. He also supervised the PhD thesis of Dr. Jack Dunn and Daisy Zhuo, the other co-founders of the company. He is also a serial entrepreneur. He has founded many companies, many of which had very successful exits. Many of you would agree to say that advances in artificial intelligence have had a huge impact on society. But we're also starting to see how the trust that we have towards these systems breaks down when they stop to work properly and people cannot understand why. Government agencies have started to require interpretability as part of regulatory requirements. For instance, in Europe, GDPR requires all AI applications to provide a right to explanation. But beyond regulations and for businesses to take full advantage of AI, it needs to be explained, understood, and trusted by the humans who will take actions on these decisions. Business leaders are realizing this now and are calling for action. But now, to put this more concretely, let's see how we differ from other AI companies. This illustration comes from a medical use case in which we had to assess a patient's risk before surgery. So machine learning applications can be broadly divided in 2 categories. On the one hand, you have black box model that just takes the input in this case, a patient's characteristics, and just output a prediction. Here, a mortality risk of 26%. But you do not know how and why the model got to that prediction. You only get a probability estimate. On the contrary, interpretable models tell you exactly why. Here, because the patient is more than 25 years old and because he is male. Then the doctor and the patient can see this and have a lot more confidence towards the prediction. And in turn, they can make better informed treatment decisions. But now, interpretability is not a new concept. The issue is that historically, interpretable methods have been lagging behind black box methods in terms of performance. But with years of research at MIT, we were able to build models that bridge the gap between interpretability and performance. And with these modules as building blocks, we have built these series of business solutions from end to end that deliver interpretability at each stage of the analytics lifecycle, from data cleaning to predictions to prescriptions, adding value at each stage while remaining completely understandable and transparent to everyone at your organization. But now let's see on a few of our success stories where interpretability adds value. In Industry 4.0, we've partnered with a leading car manufacturer to develop an understandable predictive maintenance tool using their IoT device signals so that they could understand the logic behind machine failure predictions. So to give you an example, on the tree on the right, we can get a sense of this logic behind a decision path to failure. So here in this case, because the machine has been heavily used in the past days and because the sensors report higher pressure than usual, then the model predicts that it's likely to fail in the next shift. In another application with an industrial company, we've helped them optimize their machine settings on their production line so that they could trade off different contradictory objectives. The first one was downtime reduction, the second one output maximization, and finally control of carbon emissions. In both applications, our models gave the operator higher confidence towards the models with which they could act upon the machines. These are just two examples out of our many applications over the past years with our previous customers. Our tools are general purpose, meaning that they can be applied on any of your machine learning problems that you have today, and meaning also that we are ready to build and improve the trust in your data-driven decision-making, starting today with licensing and consulting agreements. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be also available outside if you want to discuss further.
Thank you, Maxime. Our next speaker is Ludovic Verdier, Senior Account Executive at Dawex.
Hello everyone. So I'm very pleased to be here in front of you, and thank you for the opportunity to pitch Dawex. I am Ludovic Verdier, and I'm the Senior Account Executive at Dawex. Let's start with a short video. So what we do at Dawex actually in the data value chain, if we sum up, there is three key topics. The first one is data storage with the cloud. Second one is data analytics, data processing with AI. And actually the missing link in the data value chain was data exchange. So our mission at Dawex is to facilitate and accelerate secure data circulation between economic stakeholders, and so contributing to the development of this new data economy. So at Dawex, we're a team of 50+ people, and we are actually the leading technology companies for data exchange and data marketplace solution. 20+ million euros in funding since the creation of DAWEX in 2015. And recently, we've been selected by the World Economic Forum as a Technology Pioneer 2020. So it's beyond being a prestigious award for DAWEX, it's also the recognition that this topic of data exchange to boost innovation has become mainstream. So what we provide at DAWEX, we provide the data exchange platform technology in a SaaS mode. It's fully branded, fully configurable, and it gives the opportunity to our clients to exchange data within their ecosystem, with their partner, with their client, with their strategic partner providers, with some key topics such as data exchange governance, with traceability, with licensing, with control, and of course with regulatory compliance, and also with the possibility to manage different data exchange business model, exchanging data for free with open data license, monetizing data, and also in a transactional mode or subscription mode. So let's take some concrete example in various verticals. The first one actually in the agricultural ecosystem, where data has become mainstream to manage water use, to manage and to measure climate impact. We have provided our technology to Hack Data Hub, which is today the leading data marketplace in the agricultural industry. For example, on this platform, you have agricultural cooperative, you have the French Ministry of Agriculture that provide data in open data mode, but with full traceability over the use of the data on the platform. Another example in Japan, we've launched the first Japan data exchange with a multi-billion trading companies called Kanematsu, which is actually envisioning data trading as an extension of its actual goods trading in steels, materials, grain, and they want to onboard on this platform a large Japanese corporation, conglomerate, and give them the possibility either to access to new data sources or to provide data on a secure data marketplace powered by our technology. Another use case, recently, 1 month ago, we launched the Space Data Marketplace. It's a project supported by the French government space agency, the CNES, and the French Recovery Plan. DAWEX is lead this consortium with other large organizations such as Airbus, Thales, Dassault, and also Geoflex, which is pitching just after me. And actually, the ambition of the Space Data Marketplace is to democratize the access of space data, data from satellite, data from Earth observation, and saying that thanks to data exchange, we can drive new use case, we can boost innovation. For example, companies in the construction industry, thanks to accessing to data from satellite, will be able to better observe their building sites and other use cases. So to conclude, actually how we see the future of data exchange, it will be regulated such as the stock exchange. We're going to see more and more data marketplace in different verticals, and this data marketplace will be interconnected. And as we see at the European level initiative with Gaia-X, with the different data governance acts and data acts carried by the European Commissioner Thierry Breton, we will see that data exchange will be more and more regulated, and you need technology to accelerate data exchange. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ludovic. The next speaker will be Romain Legros, CEO and founder of Geoflex. And I apologize, I think I changed the sequence before. No, the clicker.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I'm Romain Legros, the CEO of Geoflex. I'm very happy to be among you this morning. Thanks for the organization. So in Geoflex, we are committed to provide GNSS augmentation, GNSS standing for Global Navigation Satellite Systems, as GPS, the American system, GLONASS, the Russian one, Beidou, the Chinese one, and Galileo, the European one. All those systems provide a native accuracy at the scale of few meters. And in Geoflex, we provide a correction data stream in SAS mode to pass the accuracy from few meters down to few centimeters in real time and in post-processing, to enable integrator with standard API, software and hardware development kit to provide new application. To achieve this level of performance, we use a technology coming from CNES, CNES standing for Centre National d'Études Spatiales. This is a French space agency. And CNES had developed, during more than 12 years, 7 patents to be able to augment GNSS accuracy. And in GeoFlex, we are involved in the co-development of the technology. We are involved to industrialize the technology, or we are involved to commercialize the technology with an experience than more than 20 years in the domain. I had created the first company in 2004 that was the 4th worldwide operator, and today we scale up GNSS augmentation services. So GNSS augmentation services are developed since more than 20 years. Just imagine in terms of application all the possibilities that we offer. For example, in the domain of ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance System, on autonomous vehicle, and then in mobility as a service. Let's imagine that your car starting up when you arrive close to it and take automatically the right lane to keep this lane with a full security level. We enable this kind of new application. Imagine in delivery a drone that delivers your parcel in your hand when you leave the room. It's possible with our technology. And we provide this technology without any limitation everywhere in the world with a very scalable systems. So you can see in this slide the accuracy that we can provide. In red, you have the standard of or native GNSS accuracy. In green, the accuracy that we are able to provide close to few centimeters of the trajectory of reference of this car. In terms of market, the scale of the market is enormous, with more than 2,600 billion of euro during the decade from 2019 to 2029. So this global amount represents the GNSS hardware and GNSS embedded software, and the scale of the market for the correction data services was in 2020 at the scale of 23 billion of euro. This figure passing to 42 billion of euro in 2025 with a growth of more than 80%. How does it work? Very simple. We used a GNSS permanent infrastructure of 80 reference stations everywhere in the world. Those 80 reference stations sent their observation to data centers that compute all the errors depending on the satellite. And we broadcast through interoperable format, standard format, those correction data streams through internet to the end user that can use those correction independently of the brand of their GNSS receiver. We are a very experimented team led by serial entrepreneurs. As previously mentioned, we have already created the 4th worldwide operator in the world, dedicated to provide services only in France with a huge infrastructure. And we do the next level with GeoFlex. And to do this, we are working with very experimented business developer and seasoned advisors. In terms of global recognition, we win a CES award in 2019. We start to work with SNCF to dematerialize railway signing. We won the World Dubai Championship of Autonomous Transportation, and we start to work with Groupe Renault, Airbus, Thales, and many others. And a few weeks ago, we were the winner of a second CES award to provide safe PPP technology far among the accurate positioning. And we are working with Software Republic, with Renault, and other major industrial. Thanks for your attention. if you have any question, I'm available for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Romain. The last and final speaker from the startups is Jordan McRae, founder and CEO of Mobilus.
Hello. My name is Jordan McRae. I'm the CEO and founder of Mobilus. I was class of 2005 at MIT in the Aeronautics and Astronautics Department, engineering, and lived some time here in Paris. So the event is sort of close to my heart for two different reasons. And if I try to practice my French with you after the break, please don't be offended. So the mission of Mobilus is to reinvent the voice communication experience, not just because to date it's an old paradigm, 150 years old to be in fact, but because there's some fundamental problems in terms of running a business and keeping people safe when communication is not clear and effective. We see this in the dollars and cents that it costs the construction industry every year for poor communication. This is related to delays, accidents, loss of equipment, maybe even loss of life. And so we believe that anytime a human being is in the loop, when you talk about human communication and human interaction with each other or with machines, we have a strong conviction on the fact that voice is the most natural and effective means of data transfer from human beings to other endpoints. So at the core of our solution to reinvent voice communication is two-way bone conduction technology. What this enables us to do, and so I strategically wore my orange helmet not just so that you remember me after the break, but this is the byproduct of our technology. So I'm wearing our Mobi 1 headset. You can see if I give you a side profile that I have this small module just behind my ear. This allows me to receive voice communication through small micro vibrations on my head that I hear in my inner ear. So this means that I could have my ears open and have situational awareness of what's going on around me, or if I'm in a very dangerously noisy environment, I can protect my ears and still maintain that voice communication link. In the other direction, and this is where our patents come into play, is we can capture your voice through the vibrations that are transmitted through your jaw and your skull. And so in that way, instead of trying to remove noise from a very noisy signal in a very noisy environment, instead we isolate your voice in at the source. And we have much less noise to begin with. And so we do that through isolating the vibration coming from your voice in your body, which doesn't have the background noise. So we have a whole suite of technologies, hardware and software, that integrate into this platform. The headset, as I just mentioned, that integrates and is modular into existing helmets. We have a hybrid communication device that allows you to communicate across 4G, Wi-Fi, but also your existing radio networks that you might be using on site. The whole idea is to remove as little behavior change required as possible so that it fits seamlessly into your existing infrastructure with existing protocols. In terms of traction, we were lucky to win a major contract in partnership with a company in the United States, Trimble, and Microsoft when they launched the HoloLens 2 for industrial applications. This came out as a product called the XR10 from Trimble Microsoft. We're the exclusive audio solution to that product for ear-free, hands-free voice communication in that application of mixed reality. We're also already working with Bouygues UK. We're based in London, and so we're working with Bouygues UK on the UCLH site. We've demonstrated simple use cases like slinger signalers and communicating with crane operators, having hands-free communication so they can move and manipulate heavy machinery around and stay in direct communication with the crane. And so our ask today, I guess I have two asks. One, the major ask is we'd love to hear more about opportunities and feedbacks from a Bouygues group level. We're familiar with Bouygues UK, but the more and more we become familiar, the more I realize that Bouygues how do you put it, complicated company or many complicated companies altogether at the group level. And it's a no-brainer that we have a telecom piece that's related to what we do, and we have a whole industrial piece in terms of applications. So for me, it seems an obvious solution to sort of go to the group level and look at where we can be integrated across the whole infrastructure, rail, facilities management, construction, etc. And then the second ask is for you to come out and try out our technology. I brought a few units for you to demo. And if you haven't had the bone conduction experience before, it's almost like hearing voices in your head. So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Jordan, and all the startups for sharing your success stories with us. Now it's my great pleasure to ask Olivier Roussat, CEO at Bouygues, to deliver the closing remarks of this conference.
Where I'm supposed to be, stays there. Don't need to go. Okay, good. So first of all, for the last presentation, I'm sure there is something to do, mainly for safety reason, because when we work in tunnel, for example, it's obviously very difficult to avoid accident. And one of the main problem is the noise. And when we've got accident, is mainly due to the fact that we cannot hear the signal from the main vehicle. So definitely, I'm sure we could work for this. I can, okay, it's better. So, so definitely we need to put you in contact with the people from Bouygues TP first, and maybe also a few people from Colas. But I'm sure that we could find an agreement together, and I hope we would be able to do it. Very few words just to tell you the idea of a such meeting is to try to reinforce the facts that we need to be able to be very open-minded and to look outside of our company what is possible to do, and to be very humble in front of the every new thing we could see. The situation we face a year ago with the start of pandemic shows that it's very difficult to work in unpredictable world, because everything was different when we start this year 2020. And finally, what we saw, we were able to cope with such situation, and we were able to adapt to be able to finally be in a position that we've got now in 2021, where the pandemic is something which is definitely behind us, because we were flexible enough to be able to cope with such situation and to recover and to find new way of working to avoid such problem. The idea of this is we need definitely to be really open-minded. We need to listen outside. We need to see what's possible to do. I was there just not for the last presentation, but the presentation before, GeoFlex or something like this, I don't remember. It changed entirely the way we could make some guidance on an area. So it means that we cannot predict the future with our current conviction of what we know. So we need to be able to integrate this new thing and to consider that the truth that we know won't be the truth forever, and we need to be able to be flexible enough to change our way of looking at the situation and to try to solve them. The only way to make it is to be able to see new technology, new company, startup, and to listen to them and to see and to try to imagine what we could do with them. This is something that we did, I think the last meeting, this kind of meeting, the last one was in 2019, before the war. And I hope that now we will be on the annual review, yeah. And we need again to restore this wave of analyzing and visiting new company to take good idea. We are a group which is large, very big. It's not easy for a group like us to be able to innovate because we've got a lot of constraints, and finally it prevents us from doing something new because we've got a lot of rule to be sure that we do the thing a certain way. To avoid this, the only way we've got is to be able to listen the proposals that we receive from outside. We try to work with them. This is why I told at the beginning that I think it was a good idea to try to explore what you propose for the tunnel work that we are doing every day in the world. And the main thing I could ask for the manager is to go on with a very open-minded way to visit new startup every time and to try to integrate them in our way of working, or to integrate their idea to be the way we could transform the way we work to be more flexible for the future. Again, when you look at what we did last year, it means that we changed entirely the way of working without any rule. We just adapt to the new constraint. We did it very well, very fast. Within 4 weeks, we were able to restart our work with in every division when we need to stop by mid-March, mid-April, everything was behind us. And it just shows that when we need to readapt us, we could do it. The only way is be open-minded and accept to work differently when there is good idea to take from outside. And the main reason for such meeting is to reinforce the fact that we need to be really, really open-minded and accept that there is very small organization who could help us to solve big thing, and to accept that even the very small organization could have much better ideas than we could do it with our strong volume of researcher, or strong volume of money we could put on the table to solve something. Sometimes some people are really able to do it for really nothing and to show the new way and do it much better than we do. So the only final word is please be humble and please be open-minded to look what is possible to do from outside and try to integrate them in our company. So thank you again for this meeting, and I hope that the next year we could see each other again without waiting for 3 years as we did this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rousal, for your inspiring remarks. With this, we conclude our conference. I would like to thank you all for attending today. Also, for the local, the ones that were, remotely following the conference, for spending the time listening to this, to the speeches. I would also like to thank especially the MIT speakers that traveled from Boston and Dubai, and all the other speakers. But a special thanks to Groupe Bouygues for hosting this event, or being such a great partner. It was really a pleasure working with you. I hope I'll see you, or you will be able to join us in our next conferences, November 9, the Digital Transformation Webinar, and November 17 and 18, our annual 2021 Research and Development Conference that will be hosted by us at the Boston Marriott in Cambridge. So I hope we'll see you again next year, and now we will enjoy a networking lunch with the startup exhibit. Thank you so much.